Chapter 1379. It was much easier for Zhou to think about how to defeat the enemy or how to defeat the enemy in the most efficient way than to think about how to make others feel fear. In essence, Zhou was a pacifist. If he hadn't been born in such an era, he wouldn't even be willing to kill a chicken, much less kill someone. However, this was how times were. Heroes were created by the times. Many times, people who could become heroes might not be people who wanted to become heroes. Alright, let's start with the basics. Zhou really couldn't think of how to make the enemy feel a fear worse than death. He decided to start with the simplest method. With a thought from Zhou, the stars in the heavenly cycle moved in unison. Invisible star-like sword beams descended in a frenzy. Zhou had come so late because he had spent a lot of time condensing invisible sword beams to set up the minor heavenly cycle stellar array. The universe was infinite and so were the stars. It was the same for the minor heavenly cycle stellar array. The more invisible sword beams that formed the minor heavenly cycle stellar array, the stronger it was. There was no excess, nor was there any saying that it couldn't be controlled. However, compared to the true major heavenly cycle stellar array, the minor heavenly cycle stellar array still had a flaw. The true minor heavenly cycle stellar array could automatically evolve and reassemble. In other words, all the shattered powers in the major heavenly cycle stellar array would automatically reassemble and be used in battle again. However, the minor heavenly cycle stellar array couldn't do so. Once the invisible sword beams were shattered, there was no way for them to reassemble themselves. Zhou had to condense them again. In comparison, the minor heavenly cycle stellar array also had its advantages. The major heavenly cycle stellar array would absorb all energy and reassemble itself, but the minor heavenly cycle stellar array didn't. As for the protection constellation array, which was the foundation of the minor heavenly cycle stellar array, it could absorb a large amount of energy and provide it to Zhou. Bam! Bam! The invisible sword beams that were as dense as rain kept falling, directly attacking all the guardians, including the Skyspan Tower. The invisible sword beams were everywhere. The guardians who were prepared to attack Zhou suddenly realized that each of them had to face the invisible sword beams that were like a flood. They couldn't divert their attention. With such a large-scale attack, everyone believed that Zhou definitely wouldn't be able to last long. They even believed that there would only be one round of invisible sword beams. Such essence energy expenditure wasn't something a Terragrade could withstand. From their point of view, it was already very unbelievable that Zhou could release an invisible sword beam. Every guardian used all their strength to shatter the invisible sword beams that were charging at them. They were determined to fight with their lives. They wanted to break through the sword formation and charge at Zhou. But soon they realized that their thoughts were too simple. The formless sword chi continued to fall down without any gaps. It was as though there was no end to it. After receiving a few rounds of invisible sword beams, some guardians could not take it anymore. Blood spewed out of their mouths as the guardian armor on their bodies was pierced by the invisible sword beams. Once they lost the ability to resist, they were constantly bombarded by the invisible sword chi and nailed to the ground. Cave Era wanted to use her time acceleration ability to pass through the invisible sword beams to attack Zhou, but she was alarmed to discover that the invisible sword beams were so dense that there were almost no gaps. Even if there were gaps, those narrow gaps weren't enough to accommodate her body. Zhou to leave, they sect, time 1 and 2 they have forced. The group of guardians was like a drowning person caught in a torrent, panicking and helpless. This was even when Zhou didn't have any intention of killing them. Otherwise, more than half of these Terragrade guardians would have been killed. Zhou didn't kill him out of kindness. He only wanted to observe his emotions to improve Slaughterer. Just because he didn't kill people didn't mean he didn't do anything else. While attacking the guardians, large amounts of invisible sword energy bombarded the sky-reaching tower and the sky ascension platform. In just a moment, the newly rebuilt 7-story sky-split tower was nailed with dense, invisible sword chi. Rumble. Under the bombardment of the invisible sword chi, the 7-story Tong Tian Tower was finally unable to withstand it and collapsed. The earth quaked and the mountains shook as if it was the end of the world. The Terragrade Guardians that should have been terrifying were filled with fear. There had never been a human as terrifying as Zhou. He had single-handedly blasted apart the Tower of Babel and suppressed dozens of Terragrade Guardians. At that moment, Zhou was no longer human in their eyes. Impossible. That fellow is definitely not a pure human. Blood Shaman's body was riddled with wounds as he was horrified. He could seal companion beasts, but Zhou didn't use any companion beast. Just the power of the invisible sword chi had already obtained an overwhelming advantage. Amidst the invisible sword chi's torrent, Blood Shaman felt like a small boat in a stormy sea. He could be crushed at any moment. Is a pure human really that strong after advancing? Yusuji Nao's body was like a phantom. The invisible sword chi passed through her body, failing to injure her. The power that Great Skyfien's Terra transformation gave her allowed her to ignore the invisible sword chi. However, at that moment Yusuji Nao was extremely shocked. She didn't dare approach Zhou. More and more guardians collapsed in the sword formation. A large area of the Tower of Babel had already collapsed. Even the foundation was about to be flattened. The last time the Tower of Babel was blasted apart, it didn't feel much as the time was too short. However, this time, it was blasted apart by an invisible sword chi. The visual impact and shock to those who witnessed this scene were far greater than the previous time. In their eyes, the current Zhou was like a terrifying devil, not a human. The only thing that was not affected by the invisible sword chi was the Heaven Ascension platform. All the invisible sword chi that bombarded the Heaven Ascension platform seemed to have collided with a mysterious power. Before they could even touch the pillars of the Heaven Ascension platform, they all exploded. The glowing figure on the Sky Ascension platform was also shocked. Heavenly Cycle Stellar Array? No, it's a little different. Strange, without a calamity-grade domain power, how can he set up such a large-scale Heavenly Cycle Stellar Array? It's impossible for essence energy to keep up with the consumption. Even dimensional creatures born from essence energy can't have such abundant essence energy. The figure seemed to understand what Jiang Yan was saying. It wasn't that Jiang Yan wasn't good enough, but that the enemy was just too terrifying. Thinking of Human Emperor, King of Thieves, and Zhou, it wasn't easy for Jiang Yan to last until now with such humans as enemies with the League of Defender. I believe you should understand my situation, right? I really need support, Jiang Yan said. Calamity-grade guardians can't enter Earth. Even if they enter, their strength will be greatly suppressed. They won't be of any use, the figure said after some thought. If you don't mind, I'm willing to use myself as a vessel to welcome you into this world and sweep away the filth of the human world, Jiang Yan said sincerely as he placed his hand on his chest and bent down slightly. Chapter 1380. Do you know that if I were to descend upon your body would definitely be severely injured? It might even be irreversible damage, the figure said as it stared at Jiang Yan. I know, Jiang Yan said calmly. The power of an existence like you far exceeds the tolerance of Earth's laws. It's naturally not something my body can withstand. It's inevitable that it will cause damage. Since you know that, why do you still want me to use your body to descend? The figure was clearly suspicious of Jiang Yan's request. However, Jiang Yan smiled and said, So what? Compared to this little sacrifice, I can gain much more, can't I? Oh, what do you want to obtain? The figure asked. My guardian, the Sky Mortal, is a guardian created by the Immortals' genes. As for you, you are a powerful existence of the Immortals. If you descend upon me, with your strength, you should be able to advance the Sky Mortal to the Calamity grade in an extremely short period of time. After you leave, as the Sky Immortal's contractor, I will naturally have the strength of a calamity grade. In comparison, that little injury is nothing, Jiang Yan said calmly. The figure stared at Jiang Yan for a while before saying, as expected of Wang Mingyuan's disciple, "You're indeed a smart person. I can help you advance a Sky Immortal to the calamity grade, but this is the last time I'll make an exception to help you. If you have similar problems in the future that you can't resolve, I'll consider changing a spokesperson. If I still can't dominate everything with the strength of a calamity grade, there's no need for you to do anything. I'll just commit suicide," Jiang Yan said firmly. "In that case, I'll use your body to temporarily descend upon Earth. Remember, my name is Perfect Sword Immortal." As he spoke, the figure slowly walked towards Jiang Yan, his gaze fixed on him. Although it was the Perfect Sword Immortal who took the initiative to borrow Jiang Yan's body, it was theoretically the Perfect Sword Immortal who had the absolute initiative. Furthermore, with the Perfect Sword Immortal's strength and realm, it was enough to suppress Jiang Yan. Even if Jiang Yan had ulterior motives, it would be difficult for him to do anything. However, the Perfect Sword Immortal was still very careful. If he discovered anything amiss, he would directly kill Jiang Yan. However, Jiang Yan didn't move at all. He spread out his arms like a fanatic who was wholeheartedly sacrificing himself. Without holding back, he presented his body completely in front of the Perfect Sword Immortal. Seeing that Jiang Yan didn't hold back at all, Perfect Sword Immortal felt relieved. The shadow formed by his body walked in front of Jiang Yan and overlapped with his body. As an immortal glow flowed, the Sky Immortal armor around Jiang Yan overflowed with immortal aura as it rapidly transformed. Dimensional creatures were suppressed by Earth's rules, but humans weren't within these rules. With Jiang Yan's body, the Perfect Sword Immortal had descended on Earth. Although Jiang Yan's body was too weak, making it difficult for him to unleash 100% of his combat strength, he could still unleash combat strength at the calamity grade through the Sky Immortal armor. As the immortal glow flowed and the sword beam flowed like a river, Jiang Yan's gaze changed completely. It was completely different from his deep eyes. Replacing it was a gaze that was as sharp as a sword. Perfect Sword Immortal extended his palm and clenched his fingers as he muttered to himself, "Jiang Yan is a tactful fellow. It's quite rare for him to offer his body without reservation. In comparison, his abilities aren't weak either. He can be considered a useful person. Human Emperor, Thief King, and Zhou Wen are indeed quite powerful. I wonder where they came from. All of them aren't ordinary Terragrade creatures. It's indeed a little difficult for Jiang Yan to resolve the problem with such strength. However, it can help him advance from a Sky Immortal to the Calamity grade." Outside the tower, Zhou Wen's sword formation constantly attacked. One guardian after another was struck down by the invisible sword beams. However, they weren't killed. They were only pierced by the invisible sword beams and nailed to the ground. Only 5 to 6 guardians were left resisting with all their might. Blood Shaman was covered in blood. His body had been pierced by many invisible sword beams, and his situation was the most tragic. The grotto world relied on the miraculous power of time. Although it wasn't injured, the situation wasn't looking good. Yusuji now rode the great Skyfiend armor and passed through the numerous invisible sword beams. She circled behind Zhou Wen and stabbed at his head like a ghost claw. Zhou Wen moved and dodged Yusuji Nao's attack. After Yusuji Nao's strike, the subsequent attacks came one after another. Her movement technique was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing from time to time as she constantly appeared around Zhou Wen. Her attacks could be said to be unpredictable. However, no matter how her attacks changed, she couldn't touch a single strand of Zhou Wen's hair. Upon seeing this scene, the Guardians' hearts chilled. Only then did they recall that Zhou Wen's heavenly robe could even dodge a calamity grade attack, much less Yusuji Nao, who was only at the Terra grade. In fact, it was purely because of Zhou Wen's superb movement technique that he had dodged all the attacks. It wasn't thanks to Heavenly Robe. Of course, it wasn't that Heavenly Robe didn't contribute at all. However, without Invincible Lucky Star, Heavenly Robe's dodging rate wasn't high. Most of the time, Zhou had to dodge it himself. Grotto World and the others didn't know about this. They only imagined that Heavenly Robe was still the same as before, able to dodge Calamity Grade attack. They couldn't help but feel despair. The invisible sword beam with terrifying destructive power and Heavenly Robe, who could dodge any attack, made them unable to see any hope for the perfect and powerful Zhou. Zhou sensed that Slaughterer seemed to be shaken by his actions, but the trembling wasn't too great. It wasn't as intense as the last time Zhou comprehended the principle of killing and killing. Clearly, this method of intimidation wasn't very effective in advancing Slaughterer. Just as Zhou was thinking about how to improve further, he suddenly realized that the black hole on the Heaven Ascension platform had vanished. The light on the Heaven Ascension platform dimmed as a figure tore through the air. Zhou took a closer look and realized that the person who walked over was wearing a mask and a white robe. His attire was very similar to the Lord Immortal of the League of Defender he had seen before. The reason why it was very similar was that the Guardian armor on his body seemed somewhat different. Now, the Guardian armor emitted a golden immortal glow, making him look like an immortal that had walked out of the immortal clouds and glow. There seems to be something wrong with this fellow. Why do I feel different from before? With a thought from Zhou, a large number of invisible sword beams swept towards Perfect Sword Immortal like a tsunami. Although a lot of the invisible sword beams had been expended, the remaining invisible sword beams were still like a tidal wave. At that moment, they were attacking Perfect Sword Immortal with all their might. Its might was in no way inferior to the falling stars. Countless invisible sword beams rushed in front of Perfect Sword Immortal, but in the next second, something that alarmed Zhou happened. A strange force field rose from Perfect Sword Immortal's body. Within the force field, the invisible sword beams came to a standstill as though they had frozen in midair. Chapter 1381. Do you think you are worthy of using sword beams with that incomplete heavenly cycle stellar array? Perfect Sword Immortal walked towards Zhou step by step. As his body moved, the invisible sword beams moved again. However, this time, the invisible sword beams didn't charge at Perfect Sword Immortal. Instead, they turned around and aimed at Zhou. The sword beams that filled the sky surrounded Zhou. Calamity Grade. Zhou was alarmed. Without any hesitation, he used the Singularity Universe's interstellar teleportation ability to leave this place. However, Zhou was surprised to discover that the resonance between the Singularity Universe and the stars seemed to be blocked. He couldn't sense the locations of the stars at all, so he naturally couldn't teleport out. Ignoring you, even if Purple Star Lord comes personally, he won't be able to escape my Perfect Sword Immortal domain, Perfect Sword Immortal said coldly as he saw through what Zhou was up to. Calamity Grade? Zhou didn't have the time to think, because the invisible sword beams that blotted out the sky had already descended. Although the invisible sword beams were condensed by Zhou himself, he had spent a lot of time slowly condensing them one by one. Now that they were descending together, the other Terragrade creatures couldn't withstand them, and neither could Zhou. Ignoring the fact that the heavenly robe on his body couldn't dodge 100%, even if it could, there was no space to dodge in such a dense, invisible sword beam. The so-called 100% dodge also required space to dodge. It wasn't true that he could dodge all attacks. Many thoughts flashed through his mind as he immediately made a decision. At such a moment, if he didn't immediately make a decision, he would probably die. At the instant the sword beams landed on him, Zhou figure suddenly vanished into thin air. He didn't retreat. Instead, he teleported behind Perfect Sword Immortal, pulled out Bamboo Blade, and stabbed at his back. After falling into a Calamity Grade domain, if he couldn't use interstellar teleportation to escape, the chances of escaping were almost zero. It wasn't like turning passivity into initiative. If he could catch his opponent off guard and make him reveal a flaw, Zhou could take the opportunity to use the Singularity Universe's teleportation to leave. Clang! Without turning his head, Perfect Sword Immortal flicked his finger and struck the bamboo blade's blade, bending it. The tip of the blade was about to stab into Zhou arm. Zhou felt like he couldn't hold the hilt in his palm. The force was extraordinarily powerful, completely exceeding the power of the terror grade. Just as Zhou arm was about to snap from the force, he suddenly flung his arm and spun his arm and body along with the force. His body spun like a drill as he stabbed at Perfect Sword Immortal with bamboo blade. Dang! Perfect Sword Immortal flicked the tip of the saber again, causing Zhou to tremble again. His bones seemed to shatter. If Zhou understanding of strength and sword techniques hadn't exceeded this level, he probably wouldn't have been able to withstand the two simple finger flick. Gritting his teeth and brandishing his saber, Zhou spun like a spinning top. He used the momentum to teleport his saber and appeared beside Perfect Sword Immortal, slashing at his neck. Clang clang! Clang clang! Zhou spinning figure was like a ghost as he pushed the heart-defying sword technique to its limits. He appeared in all directions around Perfect Sword Immortal, and his sword's stance was even more unfathomable. However, every strike was easily repelled by Perfect Sword Immortal's flick of a finger. None of the strikes could touch Perfect Sword Immortal. Your sword techniques aren't bad. You have the right to be proud on Earth. Unfortunately, as my enemy, you are far inferior. Perfect Sword Immortal flicked his fingertip on the bamboo blade again. However, this time, his fingertip lit up like a firefly. Clang! When his fingertip collided with the saber, a light wave rapidly spread out like a wave. After the light wave, the bamboo blade that had followed Zhou for a long time instantly shattered into pieces. Zhou body flew out like a cannonball. After slamming into the ground, he plowed open a ravine that was hundreds of meters long. Zhou spat out a mouthful of blood. Due to the high-speed friction, the heavenly robe on his body produced an extremely high temperature that was emitting hot smoke. The heavenly cycle stellar formation and lucky evasion are just external forces that I've used. They might be useful against trash, but they're useless against me. Perfect Sword Immortal wasn't in a hurry to chase after him. As he spoke, the invisible sword beams that Zhou condensed were under his control again as they swept over like a tidal wave. However, his words left Cave Era and company embarrassed. Their expressions didn't look too good. If it was useful against trash, wouldn't they be worse than trash when they were nearly killed by Zhou? Zhou endured the injuries on his body and leaped up from the ground. However, the sword beams that filled the sky had already charged over, giving him no chance to dodge. He used teleportation again, but this time, when he instantly appeared, Perfect Sword Immortal seemed to have already determined his landing spot. Countless sword beams were already there. The moment Zhou teleported out, several invisible sword beams were stuck in his body, immediately dyeing his heavenly robe red with blood. More invisible sword beams were already right in front of him as they tore through all directions. Without any hesitation, Zhou summoned the Chaos Egg. In an instant, the Chaos Egg was pierced like a hedgehog. The invisible sword beams constantly stabbed over, one after another, colliding with each other. Thankfully, the Chaos Egg's defense wasn't fake. It could even withstand the powers of time and space, allowing it to withstand the terrifying sword beams. This is really terrible. Why isn't there any movement from Tian at all? Don't tell me she's really going to watch me die. Zhou crushed the invisible sword beams that pierced his body and took out a mythical dragon birth pill essence to swallow. The injuries on his body immediately healed at a discernible speed. In moments, his damaged organs had recovered, and his external injuries were almost healed. He's actually not dead? After all the invisible sword beams struck the Chaos Egg and exploded, Perfect Sword Immortal realized that the strange ball hadn't been pierced through. He couldn't help but be surprised. However, the surprise only lasted for a moment. To Perfect Sword Immortal, the invisible sword beams that Zhou condensed were still too weak. It was just that there were a lot of them. From the point of view of a terrorgrade, such a large number of invisible sword beams was terrifying, but in the eyes of Perfect Sword Immortal, it was nothing. Since you aren't dead yet, I'll let you witness what true sword beams are, Perfect Sword Immortal said as he raised his index and middle fingers and stabbed at the Chaos Egg. A purple sword chi formed at his fingertip. Like a purple rainbow, it pierced through the Chaos Egg and instantly collided with the Chaos. Boom! The Chaos Egg was pushed back by the purple sword beam. After it slammed into the ground, the purple sword beam continued attacking, sending the Chaos Egg deep underground. The shockwave produced by the sword beam blasted apart the ground within thousands of meters. Cave Era and the other Guardians had no choice but to retreat quickly. After the terrifying purple sword beam completely dissipated, a huge crater that was thousands of meters in diameter appeared on the ground. Even Cave Era and company were alarmed when they saw it. Chapter 1382. Zhou Chaos Egg had also undergone a test. Back then, it had been beaten like a ping-pong ball by a calamity grade, but it hadn't exploded. However, Perfect Sword Immortal's sword beam was truly ruthless. The might of the strike caused many solid essence energy crystals to form in the Chaos Egg, but it failed to shatter it. At the bottom of the crater, Zhou put away the Chaos Egg and summoned Earth Elemental Beast. He wanted to use Earth Elemental Beast's Earth Escape to escape. However, Earth Elemental Beast didn't escape far when it suddenly let out a tragic cry. Its body seemed to be penetrated by invisible swords. Zhou was alarmed as he immediately knew that it wasn't safe underground. He was still in the Calamity domain, so Earth Elemental Beast probably couldn't escape. However, this way, Zhou roughly knew the range of Perfect Sword Immortal's domain. He had some confidence. Earth Elemental Beast was on the verge of death. All Zhou could do was order it to escape from the ground before immediately unsummoning it. Even so, he failed to save Earth Elemental Beast's life. The patterns on Earth Elemental Beast gradually faded before disappearing. Zhou couldn't sense its existence. F*CKU. Zhou gritted his teeth. Perfect Sword Immortal took a step forward and appeared above Zhou. He looked down at him and said, "You're actually not dead. You really surprised me. I won't die even if you die." Zhou teleported and arrived behind Perfect Sword Immortal. He swung his arm to slash. However, just as he raised his arm, Perfect Sword Immortal turned around and kicked him in the abdomen like a phantom, sending him flying. Cough, cough. Blood spewed out of Zhou's mouth. The kick had severely injured him and nearly caused his stomach to explode. As it was too fast, Zhou failed to react in time. Sword beams flashed as Perfect Sword Immortal arrived in front of Zhou at an unbelievable speed. He grabbed Zhou's head and squeezed. The scene of Perfect Sword Immortal's head exploding didn't happen. His fingers sank into a white rubber-like substance. His fingers were originally grabbing Zhou, but now it was the Chaos Egg. Sword Immortal Perfection squeezed again, hoping to crush the Chaos Egg. However, he was surprised to discover that the Chaos Egg was soft and pliable. He couldn't crush it, but he managed to deform the Chaos Egg. "I want to see how strong this ball's defense is." Sword Immortal Perfection exerted strength in his palm and held the Chaos Egg in his palm before throwing it into the air. In the instant he tossed it into the air, a purple lotus seemed to bloom in Sword Immortal Perfection's hand. If one were to take a closer look, they would discover that those were not lotuses, but rays of purple sword chi. The lotus-like purple sword beams stabbed at the Chaos Egg. Sword beams struck the Chaos Egg from different directions. As the sword beams came from different directions, the collision caused the Chaos Egg to hover in midair, unable to move at all. However, the sword beams struck it one after another. Bang! Bang! After being struck by several sword chi, the Chaos Egg's shape distorted beyond recognition. It was very worrying that it would explode at any moment. However, no matter how the Chaos Egg distorted, there were a few times when it was like a balloon that had been pierced by a needle. It looked like it was about to explode, but it ultimately didn't. Cave Era and company were alarmed. In the past, Zhou had relied on his dodging ability to dodge calamity-grade bullets and help others ascend the rankings. They believed that Zhou was just lucky to have such a companion beast. However, this time, Zhou had relied on his own strength to withstand the continuous attacks of a calamity grade. This wasn't as simple as luck. Cave Era and company asked themselves if they were in his shoes, they would probably have died on the spot after suffering a single sword beam. Back when the Metal Flower fought Yana, Zhou had also used the Chaos Egg. However, the fluctuations from the battle between the two calamity grades were too intense. The satellite hadn't been able to capture the Chaos Egg on the battlefield. Therefore, this was the first time Cave Era and company had seen the Chaos Egg's powerful defense. However, Zhou wasn't having it easy either. Sword Immortal Perfection's sword beams were too ferocious. Sword beams struck the Chaos Egg, condensing a large number of solid essence energy crystals inside. If this continued, Zhou would be buried alive by the solid essence energy crystals. No, I can't continue like this. I have to think of a solution. Zhou's mind raced, but the solutions he could think of were limited when facing a calamity grade. It wasn't that he didn't have anything that could fight a calamity grade. Truth Listener and Immortal Culling Sword had the power to fight a calamity grade. The problem was that he couldn't summon Truth Listener. Using Immortal Culling Sword required a large amount of essence energy as support. Using it once would almost make Zhou lose his combat strength. As for Sword Immortal Perfection's strength, it was clearly not a problem that could be resolved with a single strike. Furthermore, Zhou had some concerns that prevented him from using Immortal Culling Sword. Previously, Sword Immortal Perfection had been able to control his invisible sword beams. Clearly, the other party was very proficient in sword elemental powers. If the Immortal Culling Sword was controlled by the other party when he used it, it would be too late for Zhou to cry. What should I do? What should I do? Where did that fellow Tiantian go? Don't tell me she's really going to watch me die. Zhou was at his wits' end as he thought of Tiantian again. Zhou found it odd. Logically speaking, Tiantian shouldn't have let him die before figuring out the true situation of the candy box. However, Tiantian hadn't taken action yet, as though she had no intention of saving him. Although he didn't know what was going on, Zhou knew very well that he couldn't count on Tiantian. At that moment, Tiantian was in the sky with an anxious look on her face. She was indeed very powerful, but walking on Earth wasn't without taboos. There were some rules that she had to abide by. Now, she was in a dilemma as to whether she should break the rules to save Zhou. If she broke the rules, the impact on Earth would be immeasurable. Zhou didn't know any of this. Instead, he was somewhat glad that he had discovered that Tiantian wouldn't help him. If he really went to Chess Mountain and realized that Tiantian didn't care about his life, he would be in deep trouble. Although Perfect Sword Immortal was terrifying, he wasn't as terrifying as the Dharch in Zhou's heart. In fact, Zhou had seen a few calamity-grade existences like Perfect Sword Immortal. For example, Tsukuyami, Goddess Drought Ba, Ant City's Guardian, and so on. They didn't feel weaker than Perfect Sword Immortal. The difference was that Tsukuyami hadn't fought Zhou seriously. Due to some reasons, Drought Ba had shown mercy. That was why he felt that they weren't as strong as Perfect Sword Immortal. As for Ant City's Guardian, Zhou hadn't defeated her once. He didn't know how strong she was now or how strong she would be in the future. Quickly think of a solution. I have to think of a solution. Zhou didn't have the time to let his imagination run wild. There were too many solid essence energy crystals, and he was about to fill the Chaos Egg. If this continued, the chaos egg would really explode. I'll suck. It's useless even if I suck. Even if my entire body is a sea of energy, how much can I suck? I'm afraid I'll die before the chaos egg. Die from overeating. Wait, speaking of eating, it seems like I really have someone who can eat a lot. Zhou Wen's eyes suddenly lit up as he thought of Tyrant Behemoth. Chapter 1383. There was a very difficult technical problem to get Tyrant Behemoth to devour the solid essence energy crystals in the Chaos Egg. The last time the Chaos Egg was about to explode, Zhou Wen had thought of this problem, but he ultimately chose to use the Immortal Culling Sword. This was because the Chaos Egg was only effective against Zhou Wen himself. Furthermore, the space was extremely narrow. Even as Zhou Wen's companion beast, it was unlikely for it to enter the Chaos Egg and directly devour the solid crystals inside. In the past, Zhou Wen would first absorb the essence energy in the Chaos Egg before transferring it to his companion beast. This problem had never been resolved. However, it was different now. Although Zhou Wen had yet to succeed in researching the infinite spatial circulation skill, the parts regarding spatial exchange and teleportation could resolve this problem. As long as Zhou Wen left a spatial mark in Tyrant Behemoth's mouth, even if he didn't summon it, he could still constantly send the solid essence energy crystals into its mouth. The only problem was that Zhou Wen still needed to summon Tyrant Behemoth once and leave a spatial mark in its mouth. Then, he could continuously teleport the solid essence energy crystals in. Of course, this spatial mark couldn't be used in exchange for Tyrant Behemoth's body. Thankfully, Zhou Wen's current research results had resolved this problem. Zhou Wen could use the mark itself as an exchange and didn't need to exchange the mark with it. The sword beams outside came one after another. It was clearly not an easy task to retrieve the Chaos Egg and summon Tyrant Behemoth once. He had to take the risk of dying. Thankfully, Zhou Wen still had a delayed skill like Spacetime Theft. He could use Spacetime Theft to cast the skill before retrieving the Chaos Egg. If he cooperated well, he might be able to complete a series of actions at the same time before summoning the Chaos Egg. This way, he would be exposed to the outside world for a short period of time and the risk would be minimized. Of course, this was only theory. Whether he could achieve a perfect connection was still a problem. I can only take a risk. Zhou Wen wasn't too confident, but now that the solid crystals in the Chaos Egg were almost full, he had to take a gamble. Thankfully, the Lotus Flower sword beams that Perfect Sword Immortal had released were almost exhausted. Zhou Wen planned on completing this risky action before the Lotus Flower sword beams were exhausted and Perfect Sword Immortal had yet to release a new skill. Now, all Zhou Wen could do was silently pray that Perfect Sword Immortal wouldn't immediately release his other skills. Otherwise, he would have to face him head-on. Perfect Sword Immortal didn't do anything new as he kept looking at the Chaos Egg. Even an ordinary Calamity Grade Super would find it difficult to withstand the Lotus Flower sword aura he released. Zhou Wen, who was at the Terror Grade, was actually able to last so long. Although he was using pure defensive abilities, it was already very shocking. It made him increasingly feel that he had to strengthen Jiang Yan. Jiang Yan's opponents were truly powerful. Zhou Wen silently waited for the last sword beam to strike the Chaos Egg as his heart couldn't help but race. There was nervousness and excitement. This kind of extreme challenge in the face of danger made his somewhat numb nerves abnormally active. How fast is the reaction speed of a Calamity Grade? 100 milliseconds? 10 milliseconds or 1 millisecond? Zhou Wen didn't know how fast Perfect Sword Immortal's reaction was. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to use any skills after coming out before being blasted to death by Perfect Sword Immortal's sword beam. Therefore, Zhou Wen needed to take everything into account and try his best to do it to the extreme. Boom! The last sword beam struck the Chaos Egg, causing it to distort and sway. It was like a balloon that was filled with water and had been struck by a fist. Thankfully, The Chaos Egg ultimately survived and wasn't blasted apart by the sword beam. Perfect Sword Immortal frowned slightly. Just as he was about to use a stronger attack to blast the Chaos Egg apart, he suddenly saw that the Chaos Egg had vanished as the sword beam vanished. When Perfect Sword Immortal saw Zhou Wen's figure appear, he was about to launch an attack to eliminate him. As Jiang Yan was relatively weak, he was only at the epic stage. He couldn't withstand his possession for long, so he had to end the battle quickly. Otherwise, even if he won, Jiang Yan's body would be crippled. However, before Perfect Sword Immortal could take action, he heard Zhou Wen's voice almost at the same time the Chaos Egg vanished. Zhou Wen roared, "Come on out, Earth's strongest companion beast." Perfect Sword Immortal wasn't interested in what Zhou Wen had to say. He only wanted to kill Zhou Wen immediately, but when he heard Zhou Wen shout the words, "Earth's strongest companion beast," he subconsciously paused. He naturally knew that it was impossible for Zhou Wen to have the strongest companion beast on Earth, but the entire dimension wanted the strongest companion beast on Earth. This name made him subconsciously want to see what companion beast Zhou Wen had summoned. Boom! Tyrant Behemoth was summoned by Zhou Wen. Its strong body landed on the ground, causing an earthquake-like quake. Zhou Wen was overjoyed when he saw that Perfect Sword Immortal didn't immediately attack. He immediately used the sky-stealing sun-swapping technique and shot the mark into Tyrant Behemoth's mouth. When Perfect Sword Immortal saw Zhou Wen's actions, he immediately realized that there was a problem. He instantly shot out a sword beam from his finger. The sword beam flashed and vanished, almost invisible. Zhou Wen summoned Tyrant Behemoth back almost at the same time and used the Chaos Egg again. Even so, he was still a step too slow. Perfect Sword Immortal's sword beam stabbed into Zhou Wen's heart before the Chaos Egg appeared. The Chaos Egg enveloped Zhou Wen's body, but Zhou Wen's chest was also penetrated by the sword beam. The sword beam looked like a purple ancient sword, and Zhou Wen seemed to be surrounded by lightning. Zhou Wen's heart was pierced, but he didn't feel any pain. Ah! Suddenly, Zhou Wen felt an electric current pass through the sword beam, causing his entire body to twitch as though he was having an epileptic fit. He had actually been fooled by Zhou Wen. This made Perfect Sword Immortal's expression turn cold. He stared at the Chaos Egg and said coldly, "The sword beam you are struck by is a heavenly tribulation sword. Although it won't kill you immediately, it will release 9 heavenly tribulation lightning bolts. The first lightning will destroy your body, the second lightning will slice your bones, the third lightning will end your life, and the fourth lightning will destroy your soul. Even an apocalyptic expert can't withstand the pain of the 9 heavenly tribulation lightning. If you come out now, you can die a quick death. If you continue hiding, I'm afraid your life will be worse than death." "At least I'm not dead," Zhou Wen said through gritted teeth. He had already done his best, but he was still injured by Perfect Sword Immortal. This was the difference in strength that Zhou Wen couldn't control. Thankfully, Perfect Sword Immortal didn't attack immediately, so he didn't have the time to explain other skills. All he could do was use his fastest heavenly tribulation sword. Otherwise, Zhou Wen would have died long ago. At the end of the day, Zhou Wen had fought for a chance of survival for himself. Just as he said, he wasn't dead yet. Chapter 1384. Zhou Wen's forehead was covered in cold sweat as his face contorted from the pain. The lightning that surged out from the heavenly tribulation sword wasn't ordinary lightning. If it were ordinary lightning, it would at most electrocute a person to death. However, this lightning seemed to be able to penetrate deep into his cells, making Zhou Wen feel as though his cells were being pierced by needles. The pain that seeped into his soul was indescribable. The so-called destruction by lightning didn't mean destroying the body in the traditional sense. Instead, it meant that the pain the body endured would cause a person to self-destruct. Ordinary people would probably commit suicide after being struck by lightning. Zhou Wen didn't commit suicide. His body trembled as he gritted his teeth. However, as he circulated the Chaos Egg, he circulated the Human Emperor Sutra and continued using the sky-stealing sun-swapping technique to transfer a portion of the Chaos Egg's solid crystals to Tyrant Behemoth. Perfect Sword Immortal could still hear Zhou Wen's tragic cries in the beginning, but later, he couldn't even hear his screams. He couldn't help but frown slightly. To be able to withstand the pain of the heavenly tribulation without even screaming, he has some backbone. Perfect Sword Immortal believed that Zhou Wen would definitely die. Even a Terragrade with great perseverance could at most survive the first 3 tribulations. The 4th tribulation was almost certain death. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if Zhou Wen was lucky and didn't die from the 4th tribulation, there were still the 5th, 6th, and 7th tribulations. Each tribulation was more terrifying than the last, and it was definitely not something a human could withstand. However, every tribulation would last for a period of time. Perfect Sword Immortal couldn't wait that long. Jiang Yan's body couldn't wait that long either. He naturally couldn't wait that long since he possessed Jiang Yan's body. Without any hesitation, Perfect Sword Immortal condensed another sword beam. A sword beam shot towards the Chaos Egg like a white rainbow piercing through the sun. Boom! The Chaos Egg was drowned by the sword beam as though it had melted. The sword beam that resembled a pillar of light continued without end. As for the Chaos Egg and the sword beam, it was being pierced by the sword beam from all directions. From Perfect Sword Immortal's point of view, Zhou Wen was suffering the ravages of the heavenly tribulation sword, so he definitely couldn't withstand the sword beam with his entire body. Furthermore, the sword beam had a very strong penetrative ability. Even a heavenly tribulation defensive skill wouldn't be able to withstand it for long. The Chaos Egg around Zhou Wen would definitely be pierced through very quickly. When that happened, it would be time for Zhou Wen to die. However, under the continuous impact of the sword beam, although the Chaos Egg was distorted beyond recognition, it didn't break. Inside the Chaos Egg, Zhou Wen endured the pain brought by the heavenly tribulation and constantly passed the solid essence energy crystals to Tyrant Behemoth. A large number of solid essence energy crystals were devoured by Tyrant Behemoth. Of course, there were 2 prerequisites. First, Tyrant Behemoth was Zhou Wen's companion beast. It was equivalent to a part of Zhou Wen's body, so it could devour the solid essence energy crystals condensed by the Chaos Egg. Secondly, although Tyrant Behemoth was in a tattoo state, it was still inside the Chaos Egg. It couldn't satisfy these 2 prerequisites. Even if Zhou Wen had the means to pull the wool over his eyes, he couldn't move the solid essence energy crystal out. Following the Perfect Sword Immortal's attack, a large amount of solid-state essence energy condensed, and its speed was several times faster than before. If Zhou Wen hadn't teleported a large number of solid essence energy crystals to Tyrant Behemoth, the Chaos Egg would have long exploded. However, Zhou Wen was still very worried. This was because after Tyrant Behemoth devoured a large number of solid essence energy crystals, the tattoo began to glow like a red-hot branding iron. Hold on. Zhou Wen could only hold on. If he went out and risked his life, death was almost certain. However, Tyrant Behemoth was only at the mythical stage after all. It had yet to reach the legendary realm of devouring 1,000 mountains a day. As for the solid essence energy crystals it had eaten, in terms of energy, it wasn't as simple as 1 or 2 mountains. Just as Zhou Wen was worried that Tyrant Behemoth would explode from the overload, Tyrant Behemoth's tattoo began to change. This fellow. Is it evolving while eating? Zhou Wen was pleasantly surprised to discover that Tyrant Behemoth had begun to evolve. Furthermore, it was a direct evolution. It didn't need the rebreeding process that ordinary companion beasts needed to evolve. As expected of the glutton behemoth, it's evolving while eating. It's too powerful. Zhou Wen was ecstatic as he teleported more solid crystals over. He had no choice. Perfect Sword Immortal's attack was too powerful. If he didn't teleport the solid essence energy crystals out as soon as possible, the Chaos Egg would explode at any moment. Even with such constant teleportation, the essence energy crystals in the Chaos Egg still maintained their state of occupying most of the space. This was because the energy of the essence energy crystals was just too high-level and pure. Only the mythical tyrant behemoth could complete its evolution in a short period of time because of the high purity and grade of essence energy. Tyrant behemoth's tattoo had become somewhat indistinct. In the past, it was black, but now it was the color of a black hole that absorbed all light. Even one's gaze was sucked in. It was impossible to see what Tyrant Behemoth's tattoo looked like. After completing its evolution, Tyrant Behemoth's appetite increased greatly. The solid essence energy crystals that Zhou teleported over could no longer make Tyrant Behemoth glow and heat like before. This change made Zhou, who was enduring the pain of the heavenly tribulation, feel much better. Although the heavenly tribulation lightning made him feel very painful, Zhou's willpower was just too tenacious. Such pain couldn't waver his mind. Zhou reached out to pull out the heavenly tribulation sword from his chest, but when his palm touched the sword, it passed through as though the sword didn't exist. Instead, when his palm passed through the heavenly tribulation sword, the pain intensified several times. What the hell is this thing? Zhou circulated several powers, but he failed to produce any good effects. He could only rely on his willpower to resist it. 3 minutes later, the pain of the lightning piercing through his body suddenly vanished like a tide. Before Zhou could take a deep breath, lightning suddenly surged out from the heavenly tribulation sword. However, this time it was different from before. The lightning didn't bring Zhou any pain. He didn't even feel any pain. However, in the next second, Zhou felt something worse than pain. It itched. The bone-piercing itch felt as though thousands of ants were crawling under his skin. It made Zhou's entire body tremble. Sometimes the pain could be endured, but the itch wasn't that easy to endure. The perfect sword immortal outside wasn't just surprised. His most destructive Great Destruction sword Flash still failed to crack the Chaos Egg. It's already time for the second heavenly tribulation. The current him shouldn't be able to focus. It's difficult for him to fight the Great Destruction sword Flash, right? Perfect sword immortal thought. Chapter 1385. Yusuji now stood at the peak of the mountain and watched the battle from afar with a complicated look in her eyes. In order to obtain strength, she had contracted Great Skyfiend and indeed obtained extremely powerful strength in a very short period of time. For a period of time, Yusuji now even believed that she would become the mainstream and pioneer of humanity's future. However, things didn't seem to develop in the direction she had expected. Although many humans had chosen to contract guardians and become contractors, guardians didn't become the mainstream of humanity. However, guardians didn't become the mainstream of humanity. The Holy Spirit would advance through spirit casting. Hui Haifeng had created the mythical liquid. There were also humans like Human Emperor and King of Thieves who had advanced to the mythical stage. As no one had seen Human Emperor and Thief King's true faces, it was impossible to determine if they had used spirit casting or mythical fluid. All they knew was that they hadn't contracted guardians. However, Zhou in front of her most likely hadn't used anything like mythical fluid. This was because he didn't have any characteristics of dimensional creatures on him, nor did he sense any auras other than humans. A human could actually reach such a level and even fight a calamity-grade expert. This dealt a huge blow to Yusuji Nao's heart. Can the strength of humans really be that strong? Yusuji Nao's conviction that she had always held onto wavered. Although she was a very opinionated person and had always done things according to her own ideas, Zhou performance made Yusuji Nao, who had a heart of steel, begin to doubt herself. Even if the 4 heavenly kings attacked together, they probably wouldn't be able to last a minute against such a powerful calamity-grade force. However, Zhou had managed to last until now without being completely defeated. However, Zhou wasn't having a good time. Although the bone-chilling itch didn't affect him much, it was still a problem. Zhou Wen's focus talent was unparalleled. If it was only pain and itch, it wouldn't affect him as long as he didn't think about it. He was afraid that calamity-grade power wasn't that simple. If the subsequent heavenly tribulation directly attacked his body, Zhou Wen's body wouldn't be able to withstand the impact of the calamity-grade power. He would be instantly killed. In a battle with a calamity grade, I can only summon Truth Listener or use the immortal culling sword. Otherwise, there's no chance of victory. I won't even have a chance to fight. Unless I can advance to the Terror grade, I might still have a chance. Zhou Wen thought of Slaughterer. Slaughterers could only advance in rank if they could instill fear in their opponent. However, the one being suppressed right now was him. His opponent had an absolute advantage. Forget instilling fear in his opponent, it was impossible for him to even injure his opponent. 3 minutes passed quickly, but Zhou Wen still couldn't think of a solution. The heavenly tribulation changed again. This time, Zhou Wen no longer felt itchy, but something even more terrifying happened to him. Zhou Wen instantly felt that his various sensory abilities had been magnified countless times. He was even sharper than when he used Great Brahma. Ah! Zhou Wen couldn't help but scream. Pain, numbness, soreness, and itchiness surged through him under the stimulation of the lightning. Originally, such stimulation wasn't something Zhou Wen couldn't endure. Usually, he wouldn't even grunt. However, because his perception had been magnified, Zhou Wen was extremely sensitive. The painful stimulation was magnified countless times. This stimulation had already reached the limits of human pain tolerance, but once Zhou Wen focused on thinking about something else, the pain would weaken. It couldn't be said that it had weakened. It could only be said that because he was distracted, he could no longer feel the pain. How can I advance Slaughterer to the Terror grade? What am I supposed to do? Although Zhou Wen knew that it was very difficult, this was the best chance for him to save his life. Therefore, all Zhou Wen's thoughts were on how to advance Slaughterer. The pain became weaker and weaker. 3 minutes wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. Soon, the third heavenly tribulation passed. During these 3 minutes, Tyrant Behemoth began to glow and heat up again because it had swallowed too many essence energy crystals. Thankfully, it wasn't as hot as before. It probably hadn't reached its limits. The fourth heavenly tribulation lightning surged out. This time, it wasn't as simple as physical pain. Instead, it directly penetrated his soul and affected Zhou Wen's emotions. Typically, the fourth talent would trigger hallucinations, making one see their greatest fear. Many people would die at this stage. This was because humans often wouldn't lose to powerful enemies, but they would easily lose to themselves. However, this tribulation was easier for Zhou Wen to deal with than the previous few tribulations. This was because his psyche was too focused. The heavenly tribulation lightning couldn't affect his brain, causing him to hallucinate. Zhou Wen kept thinking about how to advance Slaughterer, so he didn't notice the fourth heavenly tribulation. Time ticked by. After the 3 minutes of the fourth heavenly tribulation ended, Zhou Wen still hadn't come up with a solution. However, at that moment, Zhou Wen felt Slaughterer react. Furthermore, the reaction was very intense. What's going on? Why is Slaughterer reacting at such a time? I'm clearly at an absolute disadvantage now. It's impossible for me to instill fear in the enemy. Zhou Wen was somewhat surprised, but Slaughtereur's reaction couldn't be faked. Zhou Wen naturally didn't know how shocking it was for a perfect sword immortal that he had survived the fourth heavenly tribulation. This time, Slaughtereur's reaction was more intense than ever. Zhou Wen could even sense that Slaughtereur's aura was rising rapidly. Why is this happening? Could it be that my enemy feels fear? But he clearly has the absolute advantage. Wait. Killing one's heart. Having the advantage doesn't mean he wouldn't feel fear. Zhou Wen thought of a story his grandfather had told him when he was young. It was said that there was a person in ancient times who was very worried that the sky would collapse. Every time it rained, he would flee with all his might, afraid that the sky would collapse and crush him to death. When Zhou thought of this story and connected it to the current situation and Slaughterer's reaction, he suddenly seemed to understand something. Although humans were afraid of known dangers, their fear would gradually decrease as they came into contact with them. Instead, they were extremely afraid of things that hadn't happened or had the chance to come into contact with them. For example, when standing at the edge of a high-rise building, one's legs would still go limp even if they knew that they wouldn't fall even if they were tied with rope. Or perhaps many people were afraid that they wouldn't have anyone to support them when they were old. No matter how bad their children were, they would obey them and not dare disobey them. Killing one's heart. I see. I seem to understand. The killing of the human heart is suicide. Zhou had a new realization. Many things that he couldn't understand previously suddenly became clear. Chapter 1386. It was almost impossible to guess what kind of human weakness a stranger had. Everyone, or rather, every creature, had different weaknesses. Unless God himself came, it was impossible to know what everyone's weakness was. Furthermore, if Tian was really God, she couldn't see through the weaknesses of human nature, much less mortals. Although it was indeed effective to infer a person's human weakness based on their actions and reactions, in a real battle, it was impossible to have enough opportunities to observe and understand one's opponent every time. Not every powerful enemy was named Shengguan Jinhong, nor was everyone Li Xuanhuan. Zhou had previously wanted to interpret human weakness through observation. This path couldn't be said to be wrong, but it was a very long one. Now, he understood one thing. Perhaps he didn't need too much observation to obtain the results he wanted. All he needed to do was turn the microscopic into the macroscopic. For example, rats were afraid of cat. Some plants liked water, while others were afraid of it. Some metals were easily oxidized, while others were difficult to oxidize. Zhou didn't need to understand what a person or creature was afraid of. All he needed to do was grasp the method to restrain nature. That would be much easier. This should be called enemy of nature, right? As his insights deepened, Zhou realized that Slaughterer's reaction was even more intense. He didn't know if it was because of the enemy's fear that affected Slaughterer, or if it was a result of his own epiphany. Slaughterer constantly released essence energy, as Zhou felt that his body was being modified by a strange power. His body of flesh and blood was gradually becoming different. Although he still had flesh and blood, the parts that had been modified seemed to be given a new characteristic. Zhou couldn't tell what kind of characteristic it was. His body was still the same, and his appearance hadn't changed at all. However, there was a qualitative change that was magical and strange. Slaughterer and Zhou's body fused as one. Zhou could clearly sense that his transformation was synchronized with Slaughterer'. The feeling was indescribable. If he had to describe it, it was like they were mentally connected twins. In the past, Zhou's connection with Slaughterer wasn't close. In the beginning, he couldn't even control Slaughterer. That was because his personality was very different from Slaughterer's. It could be said that they were polar opposite. The two weren't compatible. Only today did Zhou feel that he and Slaughterer were truly one. You are me and I am you. There was no distinction between them. These ordinary humans had long reached a level that Zhou had only achieved today. The reason why it was so difficult for Zhou to advance to the Terror grade was that, apart from the difficulty of advancing the Lost Immortal Sutra itself, Slaughterer''s personality clashed with his. However, at that moment the two finally found a balance, or rather, the crux that connected them. Slaughterer finally opened itself to Zhou. Zhou didn't like killing, but Slaughterers were born from killing. Zhou shouldn't have condensed such a life soul, but due to the influence of the Lost Immortal Sutra and its owner, he condensed such a life soul. The two of them were constantly getting used to each other, and they were also constantly adapting to each other. Until this opportunity appeared, there was finally no gap between them. Perfect Sword Immortal was extremely shocked. A mere human actually withstood 5 rounds of heaven's retribution without collapsing. This was simply unimaginable. Although Perfect Sword Immortal had said that the 9 tribulations could destroy an apocalyptic-grade powerhouse, it was true that very few calamity grades could survive the baptism of the 9 tribulations sword. This fellow has to be eliminated. Otherwise, he will definitely be a huge threat to our race. A cold glint flashed in Perfect Sword Immortal's eyes as killing intent unconsciously revealed itself. Previously, Perfect Sword Immortal had some reservations and wasn't willing to damage Jiang Yan's body too much, but now that he realized how terrifying Zhou Wen was, he immediately made a decision. I can still find another spokesperson, but I definitely can't let this Zhou Wen live. Sword beams rose from Perfect Sword Immortal's body as sword aura surged from his hair and skin. His robe fluttered as his long hair fluttered. The Sky Mortal armor that had already advanced to the Calamity grade constantly emitted sword beams. The terrifying sword intent was like a sea of hell. My lord, don't continue. Immortal's body can't hold on any longer. Cave Era had been paying attention to Jiang Yan. She was Jiang Yan's sister, so she knew how dangerous it was to be possessed by a dimensional creature. Now, she realized that Immortal's body had already shown signs of essence energy crystallization. This meant that Jiang Yan's body couldn't hold on any longer. If this continued, his body would completely crystallize. Even if he killed Zhou Wen, Jiang Yan would be dead. However, Perfect Sword Immortal ignored her. Now, he only wanted to kill Zhou Wen, a huge threat. Everything else was secondary. Seeing that the sword intent and sword beams on Perfect Sword Immortal's body were rapidly strengthening, Cave Era's heart turned cold. Yusuji Nao and Blood Shaman also had complicated expressions. Anyone could tell that Perfect Sword Immortal was going to sacrifice Immortal. If even Immortal was going to be sacrificed, what about them? Cave Era instantly made up her mind. The time powers on her body rapidly gathered as the time around her seemed to freeze. Cave Era, what are you trying to do? Yusuji Nao and Blood Shaman looked at Cave Era in surprise. Immortal can't die. You can stop me, but today's Immortal might be tomorrow's you, Cave Era said. Blood Shaman and Yusuji Nao exchanged looks. Blood Shaman said, even if we don't stop you, will the Guardian on you help you? Blood Shaman's words were very sinister. After all, Guardians were created by the Dimension. Would they become enemies with dimensional experts for humans? One had to know that the Guardian contract was an equal contract. The Guardian could unilaterally terminate the contract at any time. Are you still willing to follow me? This trip might lead to death. If you aren't willing, leave by yourself. Cave Era extended her palm and looked at her guardian armor as she muttered to herself. You know that you will die. Why fight? An ancient voice sounded from Cave Era's body. Because living like this will be more painful than dying, Cave Era answered. After a second of silence, it wasn't just Cave Era. Yusuji Nao and Blood Shaman also held their breaths nervously as they stared at the guardian armor on Cave Era's body. The voice that seemed to come from the dust of history sounded again. Instead of living forever in endless time, why don't you transform into eternity in limited time? Since you want to fight, I'll grant your wish. Time is infinite. The voice seemed to tear open the dusty door of history. The entire armor began to erupt with the power of time, instantly pushing the power of time to its limit. Everything around seemed to freeze as everything turned into super slow motion. Chapter 1387. Thank you. Cave Era felt the power of infinite time erupt from her body. Although she couldn't truly achieve infinite time due to her level's limitations and stop time, such power was already the limit of the Terra grade. In a certain aspect, it had already broken through the limits of the Terra grade. Without daring to hesitate, Cave Era knew that this was the power produced by the Guardian burning itself. It wouldn't last long. Only during this period of time could she do something. Attack Perfect Sword Immortal? Of course not. Cave Era knew very well that her strength was too inferior. Even if the Guardian burned itself to produce power, it wasn't enough to shake Perfect Sword Immortal. So, Cave Era's eyes flashed as she ran towards Zhou. Under the influence of infinite time, the surrounding time seemed to come to a halt. Even the Calamity Grade sword beam didn't move that fast. At the very least, Cave Era could keep up with the speed of the Calamity Grade sword beam in infinite time. Cave Era's figure shuttled through the sword beam like a ghost in the river of time. She charged in through the sword halo and landed on the Chaos Egg. Do you know what the outcome of betrayal is? Perfect Sword Immortal stared coldly at Cave Era. The sword intent on his body was still rising crazily. Half of Jiang Yan's body had already crystallized. I only know that immortals are the masters of the League of Defender. As Cave Era spoke, she pressed her hands on the Chaos Egg. The condensed time power instantly erupted, causing the surrounding time to distort and change, producing a chaotic phenomenon of time. Even the Calamity Grade sword beam seemed to be stuck. Time. Samsara. Cave Era screamed as though this was the only way she could squeeze out the last bit of her strength. She knew that she couldn't injure Perfect Sword Immortal, much less stop him from continuing to unleash his strength. The only thing she could do was take Zhou away. As long as she took Zhou away, Perfect Sword Immortal wouldn't have a reason to continue unleashing his strength. Perhaps Jiang Yan could survive. The Chaos Egg's time was distorted as Cave Era and the Chaos Egg vanished into thin air. They actually left Perfect Sword Immortal's domain. However, less than 2.5 kilometers away from Perfect Sword Immortal's domain, the Chaos Egg and Cave Era fell out together. The Guardian armor on Cave Era's body lost all its luster as though it had turned into a fossil. With the strength of the Terror Grade, Cave Era couldn't withstand the expenditure of using the two top time elemental skills, Infinite Time and Time Samsara. Zhou saw everything from inside the Chaos Egg. The moment the Chaos Egg and the Cave Era fell out, Zhou rushed out and grabbed the severely depleted Cave Era. He wanted to use interstellar teleportation to reach Venus. However, he soon realized that interstellar teleportation still couldn't be used. Light bloomed around him as he looked up and saw that the sky was completely enveloped by sword beams. At some point in time, Perfect Sword Immortal had already floated in the sky like a sun. The light emitted from his body was the omnipresent sword flashes. Is it too late? Cave Era smiled bitterly. She had already tried her best to bring Zhou out, but the expenditure of breaking through the Calamity Domain was just too great. The place she brought Zhou out was too close. Now that Perfect Sword Immortal's Calamity Domain had expanded, she no longer had the strength to take Zhou out. Traitor, it's time to atone for your sins. Perfect Sword Immortal stood high and mighty like a true immortal as he looked down at Zhou and Cave Era. At that moment, his gaze was focused on Cave Era. At the same time, sword beams emitted from his body like the sun illuminating everything. Sword beams were everywhere. Zhou had yet to advance to the Terror Grade. He wanted to pull Cave Era into the Chaos Bead, but the Chaos Bead required a creature's willingness to enter. Cave Era was worried about Jiang Yan and had no intention of escaping, so Zhou couldn't pull her in. However, the Chaos Egg could only protect Zhou. If he used the Chaos Egg now, he would have to leave Cave Era outside. Zhou wasn't a good person, but he wasn't willing to watch Cave Era die. This was because she was Jiang Yan's sister and had just tried to save him. I'll treat it as a last resort. If it works, you can live. If it doesn't work, I've tried my best. When the time comes, don't blame me for escaping myself. Zhou pulled Cave Era and quickly teleported. When they came out, Zhou had already transformed into a Chaos Egg and blocked Cave Era behind him. The sun-like sword beam was everywhere. Just as they appeared, they were struck by the sword beam. Thankfully, with the Chaos Egg in front of them, Cave Era wasn't injured. Otherwise, in her present state, she would probably die. Boom! The Chaos Egg slammed into Cave Era's body and flew out like a cannonball. It slammed into a mountain range, breaking a mountain peak. It smashed into the valley, creating another huge hole at the bottom of the valley. Zhou came out of the Chaos Egg and pulled up Cave Era, who was vomiting blood. When he looked up, he realized that the sun-like perfect sword immortal was less than 5 meters in front of them. He was staring at them coldly. Jiang Yan, oh Jiang Yan. I hope you aren't joking with me. Zhou looked around, but he didn't discover anything special. This was the place Jiang Yan had previously pointed out to Zhou. He had gone to great lengths to bring Cave Era here, hoping that there was something special about this place that might be able to withstand it. However, no matter how he looked, he couldn't see anything special about this place. There wasn't even a dimensional zone. It was impossible for him to escape into a dimensional zone to seek refuge. Perfect Sword Immortal didn't wish to waste any more time. He once again unleashed a sun-like sword beam, hoping to kill Zhou and Cave Era. Zhou was already planning on hiding in the Chaos Egg, but he suddenly realized that the sword beams had stopped less than a meter away from them. They didn't shoot over again. Jiang Yan really didn't lie to me. But what's going on? I didn't discover any special power nearby. What's stopping these sword techniques? Zhou was pleasantly surprised as he looked at the sword beam that was as still as sunlight. He looked up at Perfect Sword Immortal and saw him pressing his face with one hand. His body was trembling slightly as though he was in a battle. You're too naive to want to vie with me for control of your body. Everything you have already belongs to me. What else can you use to compete with me? Perfect Sword Immortal seemed to mutter to himself. His tone was fierce as he gradually raised his face. Although he couldn't see what his face looked like under the mask, his eyes seemed to be recovering to their previous state. Suddenly, a petal that resembled a rose flew out from the deep valley. It passed through the layers of sword beams and landed on Perfect Sword Immortal's forehead. Chapter 1388. The Perfect Sword Immortal's strength was extremely powerful. Even the Chaos Egg couldn't withstand the increasingly powerful sword beam. As for the seemingly weak petal, it didn't fly very fast. Yet, it was able to pass through the layers of sword beams and land on Perfect Sword Immortal's forehead. This was truly unbelievable. What was even more surprising was that, after the petal landed on Perfect Sword Immortal's forehead, it melted like a snowflake and seeped into his guardian armor. In the next second, purplish-red petals appeared on Perfect Sword Immortal's body. In the blink of an eye, they enveloped his entire body, forming a flower armor. Fairy burial! Zhou immediately widened his eyes. He never expected that the immortal would be Jiang Yan because the immortal's guardian wasn't fairy burial. Back then, he had contracted Jiang Yan's guardian with him, so how could he not be familiar with it? At that moment, he recognized it at a glance. So that's how it is. It's no wonder Cave Era wants to save me. So the person she really wants to save is Jiang Yan. Zhou finally understood. Previously, he was puzzled as to why Cave Era would take such a huge risk to save him. Just because he was her younger brother's junior didn't seem to make sense. You actually contracted 2 guardians. Perfect Sword Immortal already understood what had happened and why the sword beam couldn't injure the petal. He was using Jiang Yan's body to fight. In essence, the current Perfect Sword Immortal was actually Jiang Yan. As for fairy burial, he had a contract with Jiang Yan. Furthermore, it wasn't an ordinary guardian contract. It was a life and death contract. If Jiang Yan was injured, it was equivalent to fairy burial being injured. It was the same the other way around. Therefore, Perfect Sword Immortal couldn't injure fairy burial, or he would be injuring himself. Unless he abandoned Jiang Yan's body, it was impossible for him to injure fairy burial. That's not right. What guardian is this? Perfect Sword Immortal frowned slightly. The flower armor formed by the Guardian was actually absorbing and devouring his calamity powers. Perfect Sword Immortal naturally sensed that the flower armor was only at the Terra grade, but for some reason, it could absorb his calamity grade powers. Although the absorption speed wasn't fast, this kind of absorption was very rare. Perfect Sword Immortal could faintly feel that the power of the flower armor seemed to restrain him. Under normal circumstances, he should have been able to control Jiang Yan's contracted guardian since he had already occupied Jiang Yan's body. However, this flower armor rejected his will and wasn't under his control. Immortal Burial. Jiang Yan regained the power of Immortal Burial and finally regained some control. However, he could only make a sound. The rest of the control was still in the hands of Perfect Sword Immortal. You deserve to die just because of that. You've been patiently plotting for so long just to borrow its power to devour me? Sword Immortal Omnipotence said coldly, "It's a pity that you're still ignorant. Although I don't know why this Guardian's power has a faint restraining effect on me, its power is still too weak. As long as I leave your body, I can easily destroy both your body and it. Do you dare to leave my body now?" Jiang Yan said indifferently. Perfect Sword Immortal understood what Jiang Yan meant. Without Jiang Yan's body as a support, he would be repelled by Earth's laws. When that happened, his strength would be greatly weakened. With Zhou by his side, if he were to be weakened to the Terra grade, he would probably die. It would be useless even if he destroyed Jiang Yan's body. It'll be the same to kill you after I kill him. Perfect Sword Immortal Omnipotence turned to look at Zhou. The power of Immortal Burial wasn't too harmful to him for the time being. He had only absorbed a very small portion of its power, so it didn't affect his combat strength much. Perfect Sword Immortal Omnipotence only needed to follow his previous plan to kill Zhou before leaving Jiang Yan's body to kill Jiang Yan and Immortal Burial. However, Perfect Sword Immortal Omnipotence was still somewhat puzzled as to why Jiang Yan could contract two guardians. In theory, it was impossible for the same person to contract two guardians. Furthermore, guardians wouldn't be willing to share their contractors with other guardians. This was because guardians were natural enemies to begin with. They were created to defeat each other. It was impossible for guardians of different races to contract the same person. Jiang Yan, what other plans do you have? Tell me quickly, Zhou shouted at Jiang Yan. Since Jiang Yan had set up such a trap, he should have a way to deal with Perfect Sword Immortal Omnipotence. My plan is for you to hold him back while I absorb his strength, Jiang Yan said. Zhou was slightly taken aback before he flew into a rage. F*ck your sister. Is that something a human would say? You call this a F*king plan? Don't be anxious. That was just plan A. I still have plan B, Jiang Yan added. Only then did Zhou feel a little relieved as he pulled the cave era and said, "Look at the situation. You're still in the mood to joke? Hurry up and tell me. Plan B is for you to directly injure Perfect Sword Immortal Omnipotence. This way I can absorb faster and the danger will be resolved faster," Jiang Yan said. Are you sure you're speaking human? Zhou was speechless. Don't feel so inferior. Have confidence in yourself. I'm very confident in you. All the best. Kill him. Also, protect my sister. Jiang Yan's tone was very relaxed, as though Perfect Sword Immortal Omnipotence was a cat that could be killed with a single strike. Are you done? Perfect Sword Immortal Omnipotence's voice seemed to emit a cold aura. It was obvious how angry he was. Jiang Yan didn't treat him as a human at all. He actually said that he wanted Zhou to kill him. Should I say that you are optimistic or ignorant? Humans can't even leave Earth. From the looks of it, it's not without reason. As Perfect Sword Immortal spoke, the sword beam on his body erupted like the sun again, hoping to kill Zhou first. Come in. Zhou extended his hand and pulled the cave era. This time, The cave era didn't resist as it obediently was pulled into the chaos bead by Zhou. Almost at the same time, the chaos egg enveloped Zhou's body. Boom! The omnipresent sword beams struck the chaos egg. The solid crystals in the chaos egg instantly filled up. Zhou didn't have the time to transfer them to Tyrant Behemoth. The continuous sword beams had already stabbed the chaos egg in several spots. In the blink of an eye, the chaos egg was about to turn into a hedgehog. In the chaos egg that was riddled with holes, the solid essence energy immediately vaporized when it encountered the outside air, turning into white essence energy that spewed out. Inside the chaos egg, Zhou saw sword beams pierce through it. He knew that it was difficult to dodge, but he was still a little short. He ultimately failed to break through the final barrier and advance to the Terrorgrade. What's missing? More and more sword beams appeared in front of Zhou. Some of them were about to stab his face. Die! Perfect Sword Immortal squeezed out his last bit of strength, hoping to kill Zhou as soon as possible. The blazing sword beams seemed to devour the entire world, destroying everything around it. Even the dust was sliced apart by the sword beam. Chapter 1389. The invincible 10,000 sword beams illuminated everything, destroying everything. The chaos egg, which was already riddled with holes, immediately shattered. Zhou no longer had any cover. Teleportation was no longer effective under such circumstances because the sword beams were omnipresent. No matter where Zhou teleported to, he would still be killed by the sword beams. Unless he could leave the perfect sword Immortal's calamity domain, that was naturally impossible. Zhou had yet to advance to the Terrorgrade, but he had no choice but to risk his life. He took out the Immortal Culling Sword, but his heart kept sinking. This was because the Immortal Culling Sword could only slash out once, and he was surrounded by sword beams. If he slashed out, he would be pierced by 10,000 swords. What was even more unbearable was that Zhou knew very well that even if he used immortal slaying, he couldn't kill such a powerful perfect sword immortal. His strength was too weak, preventing him from unleashing the full might of the Immortal Culling Sword. A full-powered strike was equivalent to a calamity grade strike. Such an attack couldn't hit a perfect sword immortal. Zhou even realized that his hand speed couldn't keep up with his conscious reaction. Before he could draw the Immortal Culling Sword, the sword beam had already arrived in front of him. Am I going to die just like that? Zhou held the sword and looked at the dazzling sword beam that was everywhere. He felt fear and indignation. Although he didn't have the time to think too much, the instinctive fear arose involuntarily. Suddenly, the sword beam that destroyed everything stopped in front of Zhou. The tip of the sword beam was almost touching Zhou's cornea. Zhou's body involuntarily trembled, as though a chill had rushed from his feet to his head. After it spread throughout his body, it made Zhou feel a little hot. His face seemed to have a fever as his dizzy legs turned a little limp. The feeling of taking a trip to the gates of hell was something that could not be experienced by those who were not personally involved in it. As the saying went, there was great horror between life and death, but it was very difficult to experience that horror. This was because by the time one experienced it, they would already be dead. It was useless even if they experienced it. Those who could experience the terror of life and death and survive were all extremely lucky. It was not an exaggeration to say that they had been reincarnated. At that instant, Zhou experienced the horror of life and death. His mind immediately became as clear as a mirror. Many things that he usually cared about were nothing at that moment. It was laughable to grieve over those matters. At the same time, Zhou finally understood why he couldn't take the final step to advance to the Terrorgrade. It was because he had never felt true fear, so how could he understand the fear of others? Only those who had truly experienced fear would understand what it was. What are you waiting for? Use your sword and kill him. Jiang Yan's voice was almost a roar, but he also knew that it was already too late when he shouted. Zhou still hadn't reacted. Jiang Yan's heart immediately turned cold. The limit of what he could do was to use all the power and unique abilities accumulated by immortal burial in that instant. He took advantage of the moment when Perfect Sword Immortal attacked with all his might, and his control over his body was at its weakest to regain control of his body. He originally believed that he and Zhou had such a tacit understanding. That instant was enough for Zhou to slash out that earth-shattering strike. It was the strike that had once killed a dimensional calamity, the strike that belonged to human emperor. However, Zhou was taken aback at such a critical moment and missed that instant. What a pity! You sure schemed well. What a good move. Perfect Sword Immortal had already regained control of his body as he broke out into a cold sweat. He never expected Jiang Yan to be able to regain control of his body. Although it was only for an instant, it was enough to shock him. If Zhou hadn't reacted in time, he might have been severely injured in that instant. When he saw the immortal culling sword in Zhou hand, he already knew Zhou identity. He also knew that Zhou did have the ability to severely injure him. So Zhou is human emperor. What a pity. Humans are humans after all. Faced with the extreme fear of death, they ultimately can't face it calmly. You missed your only opportunity and wasted your painstaking scheming. Perfect Sword Immortal said with a sneer, Jiang Yan, oh Jiang Yan, you are indeed a talent. However, you chose the wrong person and stood on the wrong side. As Jiang Yan had unleashed all his strength, he was already exhausted. He didn't even have the ability to control his body to make a sound. Don't choose the wrong person again in your next life. Perfect Sword Immortal controlled the sword beam to shoot out again, about to kill Zhou. However, when he looked at Zhou, he was surprised to discover that Zhou's body was emitting a strange aura. That aura disgusted and even terrified him. Terror transformation? Wasn't that ball his terror transformation power? Perfect Sword Immortal sized up Zhou suspiciously. He originally imagined that the Chaos Egg was Zhou's terrorgrade power. However, from the changes in Zhou's body, it was a sign that he had just advanced to the terror form. This left him in disbelief. He couldn't believe that the human he had fought for so long wasn't even at the terror grade. However, Perfect Sword Immortal couldn't care less. He sent 10,000 sword beams stabbing down. Regardless of whether he was at the terror grade or the mythical stage in the past, he would kill him first. The sword beam that resembled sunlight engulfed Zhou, and amidst the sword beam that made it impossible to look at it directly, an extremely discordant light suddenly appeared. Crack! Crack! Gotcha! 10,000 sword beams shattered like glass as they scattered in all directions. 10 million sword beam fragments rose into the air, refracting light, making the surrounding light blurry and dreamy. A sword beam split the water and waves, splitting the shattered sword beams that filled the sky into two. It was as though the sea had split into two as a sword beam shot straight at Perfect Sword Immortal. Perfect Sword Immortal condensed a sword with his finger and converged the sword beams on his body into one to meet the sword beam. In the world, all swords have to obey me. Fighting me with a sword is courting death. As Perfect Sword Immortal spoke, his sword beam had already collided with the sword beam. Boom! The sword beam collided with the sword beam, producing a terrifying shockwave. Perfect Sword Immortal's heart palpitated as he dodged to the side, but he was still a little too slow. His cheek was swept by the sword beam's tail, immediately leaving a bloody mark. A drop of blood slowly dripped down his cheek. What's going on with that sword? Why can its power restrain my sword beam? Impossible. How can there be a sword in the human world that I can't control? Perfect Sword Immortal's eyes warped as he stared at Zhou. He held the immortal culling sword in his hand as he walked over step by step. His heavenly robe fluttered in the wind, and he wasn't injured. Why do I have to wait for the next life? I think I can choose again now. Zhou Wen felt the strength in his body and the sword intent that roared like an evil spirit in the immortal culling sword. This was the first time he could control the immortal culling sword freely. Chapter 1390. All the swords in the world might be under your control, but you can't control this sword of mine, Zhou Wen said as he slashed out with immortal culling again. The sword beam was wild. Zhou Wen felt essence energy gush out of Slaughterer. The immortal culling sword, which had extremely high requirements for essence energy, trembled and moaned after receiving the endless essence energy. It was the thirst of the parched land for rain, the satisfaction of a hungry wolf eating meat. The immortal culling sword had been thirsty for too long. In the past, Zhou Wen's essence energy wasn't enough to power it. In the past, every time Zhou Wen used the immortal culling sword, it was like giving a drop of water to a person who was dying of thirst. When this drop of water landed on his lips, not only did it not quench his thirst, but it also made him yearn for it even more. Buzz! As Zhou Wen brandished it, the immortal culling sword hummed as it slashed out sword beams. Perfect Sword Immortal condensed a sword beam to fight Zhou Wen, but he was shocked to discover that his sword beam was restrained by Zhou Wen's sword beam. It was like a mortal weapon encountering a divine weapon that could slice through metal like mud. It would be sliced apart the moment it came into contact. Retreat. He retreated again. Perfect Sword Immortal was alarmed to discover that, as a Sword Immortal, he could only retreat again and again under Zhou Wen's sword. He wanted to counterattack, but for some reason, no matter how uncomfortable Zhou Wen's sword technique made him feel, it was as though the sword beam restrained his sword beam. It made him feel terrible and unable to unleash his full combat strength. Perfect Sword Immortal suddenly had a feeling. It was a subconscious feeling that he was afraid of Zhou Wen. This fear was ingrained in his bones, as though it was innate. What's going on? A terrorgrade human. How? Sword Immortal's eyes wavered as cracks appeared in his heart. Fear constantly spread in his heart. Blood Shaman and Yusuji now, who were watching from afar, stared blankly. Zhou Wen is the human sovereign. Yusuji now watched as Zhou Wen forced Perfect Sword Immortal to retreat with his sword. Perfect Sword Immortal, who was so powerful that it left one in despair, was completely suppressed. It was as though he didn't even have a chance to counterattack. He is at the terrorgrade, right? Blood Shaman said with a strange expression. No one could answer him. Only the world-shaking sword chi and sword cries reverberated between the heavens and the earth. Zhou Wen felt as though he was in an invincible state. It wasn't just because of the powerful combat strength unleashed by the immortal culling sword, but also because of the power that Slaughterer and advancing to the terror grade gave him. In the past, Zhou Wen needed all sorts of observations and schemes to deduce the enemy's weakness, but now it seemed very natural. He didn't need too much observation to attack the enemy's weakness. It was as though it had become an instinct. This instinct was not an unfounded intuition, but a judgment based on a certain rule. It was just like learning a mathematical formula. No matter how complicated the question was, as long as one mastered the formula, one would be able to get the answer without having to look at all the questions. This was the case for Zhou Wen. He didn't need to see the weaknesses of all creatures, but he could determine their weaknesses. This feeling was simply intoxicating. The thrill of being able to see through everything with a single glance was somewhat like being a god. Coupled with the power unleashed by the immortal culling sword and its restraining effect on immortals, as well as Zhou Wen's heart-defying sword art, he managed to suppress Perfect Sword Immortal to the point of being unable to counterattack. If the body wasn't Jiangyan's, Perfect Sword Immortal would have been killed by the immortal culling sword. Perfect Sword Immortal seemed to have seen through this as well. He stopped defending and transformed into a sword beam to escape. Although Zhou Wen's speed wasn't as fast as Perfect Sword Immortal, he had the help of spatial teleportation. After Slaughterer advanced to the terror grade, Zhou Wen underwent a tremendous change. This change didn't just give him a slight increase in his physique. In fact, it had a greater impact on his other terror transformation abilities. For example, in his true terror transformation state, he could use the Godfiend era's teleportation ability almost instantaneously. It wasn't like in the past where there was an obvious pause. Another example was using the Singularity Universe's teleportation ability, which greatly increased his accuracy. The other terror transformation abilities seemed to be augmented by a halo under Zhou Wen's terror transformation state, greatly strengthening them. Zhou Wen teleported almost infinitely as he forcefully kept up with the Calamity-grade Perfect Sword Immortal. The Immortal Culling Sword in his hand constantly slashed out, forcing Perfect Sword Immortal to dodge in a sorry state. Perfect Sword Immortal had also attempted to use the Immortal Culling Sword on Jiang Yan's body, but he was shocked to discover that after the Immortal Culling Sword injured Jiang Yan's body, it carried a strange power. The power directly damaged his immortal body, but it didn't injure Jiang Yan's body. It was as though it was a power specially created to deal with immortals. Perfect Sword Immortal was alarmed and furious. He never expected that he would end up in such a sorry state when he descended to Earth. Zhou Wen, Jiang Yan, I'll remember you. Perfect Sword Immortal wanted to leave Jiang Yan's body and return to the dimension. However, he was even more shocked to discover that he couldn't leave Jiang Yan's body. The flower armor-like fairy burial seemed to have some mysterious power that imprisoned his soul that had descended into Jiang Yan's body. How can this be? The Perfect Sword Immortal was extremely regretful. He never thought that his careless decision could cost him his life here. He wanted to destroy the fairy burial on his body, but he realized that it was impossible. This was because the fairy burial armor had already fused with the Heaven Immortal armor, and the Heaven Immortal armor had been helped by Perfect Sword Immortal himself to advance to the Calamity grade. In addition to the battle with Zhou Wen, he had injected a large amount of Immortal Essence, Sword Qi, into the Heaven Immortal armor. Now, the Heaven Immortal armor was already at the Calamity grade. Furthermore, after fusing with the Fairy Burial armor, it had the power to restrain Perfect Sword Immortal's essence energy, making it impossible for Perfect Sword Immortal to suicidally destroy Jiang Yan's body. Don't you think it's too late to leave now? Jiang Yan finally regained control of a portion of his body. Perfect Sword Immortal immediately felt that something was amiss, but it was already too late. Jiang Yan once again unleashed the power of the Fairy Burial armor and temporarily regained control of his body. This time, Zhou Wen didn't miss out. The Immortal Culling Sword left his hand and transformed into a sword beam that instantly pierced through Perfect Sword Immortal's body, nailing him to the mountain wall. The power of the Immortal Culling Sword instantly spread throughout Perfect Sword Immortal's body. The power dealt great damage to Perfect Sword Immortal, but it didn't deal much damage to Jiang Yan's body. In the battle just now, Zhou Wen had already discovered this point. Although the Immortal Culling Sword could kill other creatures and its destructive power was equally powerful, it had a special lethality against Perfect Sword Immortal. When it injured ordinary creatures, the wound wouldn't continue spreading, but it was different for Perfect Sword Immortal. After injuring him, it would continue to damage his immortal body. Chapter 1391. Perfect Sword Immortal had been severely injured by the Immortal Culling Sword. Although Jiang Yan's body was also injured, it wasn't as serious as Perfect Sword Immortal's, nor did he suffer any sustained damage. Under such circumstances, he finally regained most of his control over his body. At the same time, Immortal Burial, which had fused with the Sky Immortal armor, crazily absorbed Perfect Sword Immortal's energy. Under the dual attacks of the Immortal Culling Sword and Immortal Burial, Perfect Sword Immortal roared in pain as he lost his voice bit by bit. Finally, he was completely absorbed by Immortal Burial. The flower armor on Jiang Yan's body was red and purple. It was extremely seductive, like a resurrection lily that tempted one to fall into hell. Jiang Yen reached out to hold the hilt of Immortal Burial, pulled it out of his body, and threw it back to Zhou. You came too early. If you had given me some time to prepare, I wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Jiang Yen looked at the wounds on his body. The blood armor seemed to have a life of its own as it took root in his wounds and quickly healed his injured body. You were the one who didn't inform me. How would I know what you wanted to do? Zhou said, rolling his eyes. If I had told you in advance, even if you could fool everyone, I wouldn't have been able to fool the perfect sword immortal that had descended on me. Only when everything is true can I make the perfect sword immortal sink deeper and deeper, preventing him from having a chance to escape. Jiang Yen smiled and said, Thankfully, you didn't disappoint me. Although there was a small mistake, you finally achieved your goal. My heart isn't too good. If you do this again, please find someone else, Zhou said snappily. I wasn't the one who went to look for you. You came yourself, didn't you? Jiang Yen said with a smile. Zhou was taken aback. He knew that what Jiang Yen said made sense. Jiang Yen was just taking advantage of the situation. Even without Jiang Yen, the League of Defender would still deal with him. A figure like Perfect Sword Immortal would still descend. It was just a matter of time. What plans do you have for the future? Zhou released his cave world and asked Jiang Yen. I'm the master of the League of Defender. I was, and I will be in the future. Jiang Yen looked at Yusuji now, Blood Shaman, and the other guardians. Yusuji now, Blood Shaman, and the other guardians flew over and said in unison, We are willing to continue following you, Your Excellency. Aren't you afraid that those fellows from the dimension will attack you? Zhou asked. I was afraid in the past, but now that my Celestial Immortal and Burial Fairy have advanced to the Calamity grade, I don't need to be afraid anymore. It's not that easy for dimensional creatures to come to Earth. Even if they come, they will be greatly suppressed. Up to now, only humans can make a Calamity grade stay on Earth. They can't even cross the Calamity grade. Even if they borrow a body to descend, it will at most be a calamity. Do you think I need to be afraid? Jiang Yen said. Alright, take care. Goodbye. No. It's best if we don't meet again. Zhou waved his hand and prepared to leave. Do you want me to help you resolve that? Jiang Yen said as he pointed at Zhou. What? Zhou was slightly taken aback. He looked down and realized that the Heavenly Calamity Sword was still stuck in his chest, still emitting lightning. Oh, that. I forgot about it if you didn't mention it. This thing can't really hurt others. I wonder why Perfect Sword Immortal cultivated such a useless skill. Zhou sensed that although the heavenly tribulation was still ongoing, it didn't affect him much. Previously, when he was wholeheartedly fighting, he had already forgotten about it. It was obvious how little effect the Heavenly Calamity Sword had on Zhou. Jiang Yen looked at Zhou with a complicated expression. He had absorbed the Perfect Sword Immortal, so he knew some of its abilities rather well. The Heavenly Calamity Sword's attack wasn't targeted at the body, but the mind. Under the 9 stages of the Heavenly Tribulation, even a Calamity-grade creature would most likely become an idiot or lunatic. They might even be directly wiped out and turned into a vegetable. There were many who couldn't withstand it and committed suicide. However, Zhou didn't react to the Heavenly Calamity Sword's 9 stages of Heavenly Tribulation. Others didn't know how terrifying it was, but Jiang Yen knew very well that this wasn't a reaction a human should have. It's no wonder teacher said that about him, Jiang Yen thought. I'm leaving. Zhou waved his hand and turned to leave. He didn't get Jiang Yen to help him pull out the Heavenly Calamity Sword. After advancing to the Terror grade, his understanding of all kinds of powers was much stronger. He knew that the Heavenly Calamity Sword would soon dissipate. He used teleportation to leave. With the augmentation of the Terror form, the Singularity Universe's location was much more accurate. Zhou directly teleported to the vicinity of Luoyang. The deviation was only more than 5 kilometers. It was much better than before. When he arrived at an empty spot, Zhou eagerly took out his phone and looked at his stats. Zhou, Horror Life Providence, Sigh of the King Life Soul, Slaughter Wheel of Destiny, Not Engraved, 1 Rotation, Terror Form, Disqualified Beyond S Grade, Strength, 82. Zhou looked at his stats and was slightly dazed. He originally imagined that his Terror grade was an upgraded version of Slaughterer, but from the looks of it, that wasn't the case. Slaughterer had indeed transformed into a Terror form. Its name was Slaughterer. Like the other 8 Terror forms, they were all S-grade Terror forms. However, Zhou true Terror form wasn't Slaughterer, but Disqualified. Although it was related to Slaughterer, it was somewhat different. After Zhou entered the Disqualified state, he had an extremely powerful augmentation to the other 9 Terror forms. Furthermore, he also had the ability to spy on weaknesses. However, this ability wasn't static. It would fluctuate depending on the target creature. More common lifeforms had stronger abilities. Rarer lifeforms had weaker effects, but it wasn't to the point of being completely ineffective. Apart from that, the Disqualified had a very strong augmentation to his various physiques, including his 8 senses. Otherwise, even if Zhou strength could keep up with Perfect Sword Immortal, it would still be difficult for him to match him due to his poor eyesight and reaction. In fact, Zhou various abilities were already very close to the Calamity grade in the Disqualified state. Zhou still needed to continue studying the other abilities of the Disqualified. After all, he had just condensed them, so he didn't have a thorough understanding of them. Zhou pulled out Tyrant Behemoth's information to see how far it had advanced. Tyrant Behemoth, Terror Grade, Evolvable, Life Providence, Infinite Strength Life Soul, Violent Crown Wheel of Destiny, Absolute Strength Terror Form, Tyrant Strength, 82 Speed, 82 Constitution, 82 Essence Energy, 82 Talent Skill, Mountain Devouring Companion Form, Boxing Glove. He opened his phone game and randomly chose a dungeon. Zhou wanted to see what changes Tyrant Behemoth would undergo when it entered its Terror form. Chapter 1392. Coincidentally, the Yang City Dungeon respawned. Zhou entered the Yang City Dungeon with Tyrant Behemoth. With his previous experience, Zhou didn't dare casually touch the Blood-Bone universe. All he did was let Tyrant Behemoth transform and enter its Tyrant state. The Terror-transformed Tyrant Behemoth's body instantly became as huge as a mountain. A crown appeared on its head, and its black iron-like body suffused a red glow. Its eyes were also suffused with red light, and a red light flickered in its mouth. It looked like a devil that flashed with a sanguine glow in the night. Boom! Tyrant Behemoth's body landed. As it was too huge, it immediately stepped on a blood-bone temple. Terror-grade creatures immediately rushed out of the blood-bone temple and transformed into terrifying blood shadows that charged at Tyrant Behemoth. Although Zhou felt that Tyrant Behemoth probably couldn't defeat the dozen or so Terror-grade creatures, he had no intention of attacking. It was a good opportunity to see how strong a Terror-grade Tyrant Behemoth was. More than 10 Terror-grade blood shadows rushed over from different directions. Tyrant Behemoth let out a roar as the sanguine light on its body transformed into a blood flame that burned outside its body. Tyrant Behemoth suddenly exerted its strength. Its speed was terrifyingly fast. As its massive body moved, it produced illusions. Bam! The Terror-grade blood shadow that was suspected to be a spiral turtle was pierced through by Tyrant Behemoth's claws. Its sharp claws pierced deep into its body as it roared and tore its body into 2. Then, it picked up the corpse and threw it into its mouth. After chewing a few times, it swallowed it. It was as ruthless as a devil. Kill! 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 Zhou saw that Tyrant Behemoth was fighting the crowd alone, but it didn't know how to retreat. It ignored the enemy's attacks as though all it had in its eyes was its opponent. The absolute strength of a Terror-grade creature was too powerful. In a head-on collision, No Terragrade creature was Tyrant Behemoth's match. Their bodies were either torn apart by Tyrant Behemoth or smashed into meat patties. However, Tyrant Behemoth only attacked and basically didn't have any defensive means. It was also struck by many forces. Although its body was very strong, it didn't have absolute defense after all. It still suffered quite a number of injuries, some of which were rather serious. A blood shadow that looked like a cow or a goat slammed into Tyrant Behemoth's back. The horns that were more than 10 meters long stabbed into Tyrant Behemoth's waist. Tyrant Behemoth let out a tragic cry before grabbing Blood Shadow in front of it. It grabbed its head with one hand and its tail with the other before pulling it out with all its might. Zhou watched helplessly as the Blood Shadow's body gradually elongated. Amidst an inhuman scream, its body snapped like a rubber band as blood spewed everywhere. Tyrant Behemoth fought crazily. To Zhou surprise, its injuries healed very quickly. It was even abnormally fast. Under the siege of the Terragrade creatures, Tyrant Behemoth became more and more ferocious the more it killed. It didn't weaken because of its injuries. Instead, the Blood Shadow's disadvantage became more and more obvious because their numbers decreased. After careful observation, Zhou realized that Tyrant Behemoth's ability to quickly recover from its injuries wasn't because its physique was strong enough, but because it had devoured many opponents in battle. The energy it obtained by devouring its opponent would quickly recover its body. It was practically fighting by eating. As long as the injuries on its body were not fatal, and as long as it had food to eat, it was practically a perpetual battle machine. This guy's fighting style is too strange. However, absolute strength is really useful. Among those at the same level, Tyrant Behemoth is almost invincible. The more Zhou looked at it, the more he liked it. However, he felt that Tyrant Behemoth's body was a little weak. It would be perfect if it had absolute defense. Unfortunately, absolute defense was an ability of dragon imprisonment. It was unlikely for it to appear on Tyrant Behemoth. After figuring out Tyrant Behemoth's true strength, Zhou realized that something was amiss. Tyrant Behemoth had already killed nearly 10 Terragrade Blood Shadows, but they didn't drop anything. Ignoring companion eggs, he didn't even see a dimensional crystal. Zhou looked at the game notification and realized that the game notification was slaying a certain creature's blood spirit. Only then did Zhou come to a realization. It turned out that the blood shadow here wasn't the legendary terror creature. It was just an undead. There was nothing wrong with specters, but the problem was that nothing dropped. This left Zhou depressed. He tried to activate some blood bone temples and killed the blood shadows himself. The outcome was the same. Nothing dropped. What crappy dungeon is this? It actually doesn't drop anything. Zhou was very depressed. He originally imagined that he had found a treasured land and could grind out some Terragrade companion eggs, but nothing dropped. However, Zhou also understood that there was definitely something impressive in such a strange place. More importantly, he didn't know if he could kill the calamity creature guarding this place. There was no immortal culling sword in-game, so Zhou could only rely on himself and his companion beasts to fight. Since I'm already here, let me see what secrets are hidden in Yang City. Zhou summoned Banana Fairy, Demonic Neonate, and the other companion beasts as he stormed in. There were many Terragrade blood shadows here, and Zhou had quite a number of Terragrade companion beasts. Furthermore, all of them were exquisite. Each of them could fight multiple enemies. After watching for a while, Zhou suddenly thought of something. The blood spirits here were likely formed from the wraiths of the classic of mountains and seas mutated beasts killed during the Great's flood control. The strength of the blood spirits was naturally far inferior to the real classic of mountains and seas mutated beasts. Zhou even saw the phoenix-like blood spirits, but their strength was only at the top of the Terragrade. Compared to a real phoenix, they were probably much weaker. Such blood spirits didn't drop anything, so they might be useless to others. However, Zhou had the disqualified. The disqualified had the ability to sense the opponent's weakness. This ability actually needed a certain level of basic support. If it was a creature Zhou had never seen before, the disqualified's effects would be much weaker. Although the blood spirits here were much weaker than the original version, their abilities were real. Zhou only needed to familiarize himself with their abilities and stats. When he encountered the real classic of mountains and seas mutated beasts, he could directly sense their weaknesses. It was equivalent to knowing their weaknesses in advance. That's not bad. Zhou originally found it boring, but after this discovery, his interest was piqued. He carefully observed the abilities of every blood spirit. As he was observing, a rather strange temple appeared in front of him. In Yang City, the buildings Zhou had seen were all made of blood and bones. However, the temple in front of him wasn't made of bones and mud. It was a stone temple. Tyrant Behemoth was in high spirits as it kept charging forward. Just as it was about to approach the stone temple, the door suddenly opened. There was a cow lying inside. Chapter 1393. When Zhou saw the bull, his heart palpitated. He immediately knew that something was amiss and wanted to unsummon his companion beast. Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. The bull opened its mouth and let out a thunderous roar. The roar sounded like a bull or a dragon, but it also sounded like thunder. Zhou even saw the light of the sun and moon spewing out from its mouth. Accompanied by the roar, it instantly illuminated half of Yang City. Why did it say half of Yang City? It was because the stone temple was in the middle of Yang City. Only the area in front of the stone temple was illuminated. Zhou's heart stirred as he made a decision without hesitation. He immediately teleported to the area behind the stone temple. When he teleported out, his body was immediately knocked to the ground by the terrifying sound wave. His lifeblood churned as though his blood vessels were about to explode. However, this was already considered good. Tyrant Behemoth and the other companion beasts directly suffered the terrifying sound wave in the area in front of the stone temple. Their bodies exploded one by one, turning into a bloody mist. Even a terror-grade creature with a powerful body like Tyrant Behemoth couldn't withstand it. Only Banana Fairy, who saw the opportunity quickly and was fast, escaped to the area behind the stone temple like Zhou. That was why she wasn't killed by the sound wave. Her situation was similar to Zhou's. She had also been injured, but her injuries were worse than his. As for demonic neonate, she had been hugging the demonic sword and sitting on Zhou's shoulder. Although she had also been attacked by the sound wave, she looked fine. Last time, I was probably shaken to death by its roar. I have to check it out first to see what it is. As Zhou controlled the blood-colored avatar, he took out another phone and opened the browser to search the internet. This thing. Could it be Kuei-Nyo? The more Zhou looked at it, the more he found it to be similar. Although he had only taken a glance, he knew that the bull in the stone temple didn't have horns and was still lying there. According to the information he had found online, Kuei-Nyo didn't have horns on its head and only had one leg. Zhou didn't see how many legs it had, but it was lying there and not standing. It was very likely because it only had one leg that it wasn't willing to stand all the time. This discovery excited Zhou because the bull was clearly not a blood spirit. It was a creature of flesh and blood. According to the information on the internet, every time the Kuei ox appeared, it would be accompanied by a violent storm. Furthermore, its body was covered in the light of the sun and the moon, and its roar was like thunder. Legend has it that when the Yellow Emperor discovered the Kuei cow, the goddess of mystery used its skin as a drum and its bones as a hammer. With a single strike, it could shake a distance of 500 miles and no one could stop it. This thing was definitely an excellent grade sound-type companion beast. Zhou didn't have any sound-type companion beasts now. If he could obtain Kuei, it would make up for a weakness. Just as Zhou was thinking of something good, he heard another clap of thunder. It gave Zhou a fright, imagining that Kuei Nyo was roaring again. However, when he looked up, he realized that it was real thunder and not the cry of the Kuei ox. Dark clouds covered the sky above Yang City, and thunder rumbled. Then, without any warning, a heavy downpour began. Zhou turned his head to look in the direction of the stone temple. Indeed, he saw the ox walk out of the stone temple. Its upper body was raised as it hopped forward. On careful look, it only had one leg. It walked on one leg, its body glowing like the sun and moon. It was very similar to the information Zhou had found. Kuei Nyo stood in the rain and looked at Zhou. It opened its mouth and roared again. Zhou already knew that Kuei Nyo's sound wave attack was directional. Although the sound would spread in all directions, the sound in front of him was the strongest. As long as he avoided it head-on, the damage he suffered would be minimized. After dispelling Banana Fairy, he teleported again. This time, he teleported to the furthest spot behind Kuei Nyo. Indeed, the sound waves he suffered were much less. With Zhou Wen's terror transformation, he was basically unaffected by the sound waves. Kuei Nyo jumped on one leg and turned its body to face Zhou. It roared again. Zhou continued teleporting in another direction. Kuei Nyo continuously released sound wave attacks, but Zhou dodged them all. It couldn't help but be furious. Kuei Nyo didn't seek out Zhou this time. It raised its head and let out an extremely violent roar at the sky. The dark clouds and torrential rain were dispersed by its roar. The roar was accompanied by light, radiating in all directions like a sound wave, forming an indiscriminate attack. This time, Zhou had nowhere to dodge. All he could do was forcefully resist the sound wave. He summoned the recondensed Chaos Egg. The sound wave struck the Chaos Egg and immediately produced many solid crystals. Unfortunately, Tyrant Behemoth was already dead. Otherwise, he could have fed it. Kuei Nyo roared a few times, sending the Chaos Egg tumbling backward. It slammed into the city wall and bounced back. Like a billiard ball, it slammed into the various blood-bone temples. Blood spirits quickly rushed out of the blood-bone temple that Zhou had slammed into, but they were helpless against the Chaos Egg. Zhou took advantage of the moment Kuei Nyo was tired to instantly appear behind it. He used his hand as a saber and slashed out with Immortal Slaying. Without the augmentation of the Immortal Culling Sword, Zhou Wen's Immortal Slaying was still very strong. The strength that erupted was almost comparable to a Calamity grade. However, when this strike struck Kuei Nyo's neck, it only left a shallow wound. Furthermore, the wound quickly healed. It was useless. Zhou and Kuei Nyo constantly fought, but neither of them could do a thing to the other. The Chaos Egg could withstand Kuei Nyo's sound wave attack, and Kuei Nyo couldn't catch up to Zhou. It had no other means to injure Zhou, nor could it kill him. Although Zhou could injure Kuei Nyo, due to its powerful physique, Zhou offensive strength could only touch the threshold of the Calamity grade. He couldn't heavily injure Kuei Nyo, nor could he kill it. In the end, Zhou gave up and retreated. There was no point in continuing. The injuries he inflicted on Kuei Nyo weren't as fast as its self-healing speed. No, I have to think of a way to obtain a good weapon. Zhou was thinking about where to obtain a Calamity-grade weapon. If he couldn't obtain a Calamity-grade weapon, he had to obtain a Terra-grade weapon with extremely destructive strength. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to kill Kuei Nyo. Bamboo Blade has shattered, and I can't pull out the Emperor's sword. Although the Immortal Culling Sword is useful, I can't bring it into the game. Where can I get a weapon? After some thought, Zhou realized that only the glove formed by Tyrant Behemoth was reliable. After all, with the augmentation of absolute strength, the Tyrant Glove's attack power was undoubtedly top-notch among Terra-grade weapons. The only flaw was that the Tyrant Glove didn't have a skill augmentation, so it couldn't produce effects similar to Ever Victorious and Unstoppable. If there aren't any, I'll close it up and let the Tyrant Glove have those skills. Zhou made up his mind to augment the tyrant glove with all sorts of enhancement skills. Chapter 1394. Who dares barge into the 8 tribes' territory? Yaksha and Garuda, who were guarding the 8 tribes' holy mountain, immediately shouted when they saw an outsider walking towards the holy mountain. The person looked like a man in his 30s, but he had a head full of white hair. He was dressed in snow-white clothes as he walked over step by step. He was clearly walking on the ground, but he gave off the feeling that he was walking on clouds. It was as though the ground beneath his feet wasn't dirty, but pure white clouds. The man didn't answer as he continued walking over. Yaksha and Garuda were immediately enraged. Those who could be sent to guard the holy mountain were the cream of the crop among the 8. They could be said to be elites, so they had never been belittled like this. They released their terrorgrade powers and attacked the white-robed man from the left and right. The white-robed man didn't seem to see them as he continued walking forward. As for Yaksha and Garuda, they flew up with tragic cries when they arrived in front of the white-robed man. It was as though invisible sword intents had flashed past, slicing their powers and bodies into pieces, turning them into a rain of blood. The white-haired man acted as though nothing had happened as he stepped onto the holy mountain's stone steps. The spot where he stood was clean and flawless, but behind him was a patch of blood-stained sand. Yaksha and Garuda's tragic cries before their deaths had already alarmed the 8 tribes on the mountain. Many of them rushed down the mountain and were enraged when they saw the blood on the ground and the white-haired man who was climbing the mountain. Many hot-tempered Shuras and Yakshas had already charged at the white-haired man. The sky was filled with colorful lights as though countless stars were crashing down at the white-haired man. The white-haired man didn't even bat an eyelid as he continued walking up the stone steps. Without exception, the 8 tribes that charged at him were all killed by invisible sword intent. Sabers, swords, spears, musical instruments and so on, all sorts of broken weapons flew everywhere along with flesh and blood. Wherever the white-haired man passed, none of the 8 could leave alive. On the massive holy mountain, more than 10,000 members of the 8 had gathered, but none of them dared to approach the white-haired man. With every step the white-haired man took, the 8 tribes that filled the mountain couldn't help but retreat. No one dared to resist him. My 8 tribes has always been on good terms with the immortals. As a member of the immortals, why are you slaughtering the living beings of my 8 tribes? Are the immortals going to violate the dimensional agreement? Granny Qian Xiu, who was dancing like a fairy and holding a pipa, floated in the air and stared at the white-haired man who was ascending the mountain. The male celestial ignored her and continued walking up the mountain as if he was deaf. "I'm talking to you. Can't you hear me? I am the king of Granny Ganxiu. If you have something to say, you can tell me. If you don't, take another step forward and don't blame me for being merciless." Granny Ganxiu's expression turned cold. She hugged her pipa and stared at the celestial man. The immortal ignored him and continued to walk forward. Granny Ganxiu was instantly enraged. She plucked the strings with her fingers, and the surging music turned into invisible killing intent that surrounded the male immortal. Crack! Crack! The sword light could not be seen, nor could the sound of the sword energy be heard. However, there was an invisible force that shattered the music. All the strings of the pipa in Granny Qian Xiu's hands broke at the same time. Granny Ganxiu was shocked. She wanted to retreat, but it was too late. She could already feel a terrifying sword intent approaching her. Perhaps in the next second, her head would be separated from her body. As the king of Granny Ganxiu, she was a calamity-grade expert. She never expected that the other party would force her to such a state without even moving a finger. A dragon's roar resounded through the sky. A waterfall-like dragon aura descended from the peak of the sacred mountain and coiled around Granny Ganxiu's body. As if it had collided with a divine weapon, the dragon aura instantly shattered. Fortunately, the sword intent had already disappeared. Granny Ganxiu hurriedly retreated and widened the distance between her and the male immortal. Other than the kings of the 2 tribes of Heaven and Dragon, the other 6 kings had already appeared. They blocked the path of the male immortal, as if they wanted to take him down. Tens of thousands of the 8 tribes of Heaven and Dragon had already gathered. They surrounded the male immortal with weapons in their hands and pointed them at the male immortal. The tens of thousands of kings of the 8 tribes and the 6 calamity-grade kings did not seem to exist in the eyes of the male immortal. He continued to walk forward, and his gaze was fixed on a figure standing at the end of the stairs. When the 6 kings saw him like this, they were enraged and prepared to kill him here. "Let him come up." A voice came from the end of the stairs. The person standing there was Wang Mingyuan, who had already become the Dragon King. He was also the one who had saved Xian Ta with dragon aura. When the 6 kings heard Wang Mingyuan's words, they could only order their troops to retreat and open up a path. However, the tens of thousands of the 8 tribes were surrounding the 2 sides like tigers watching their prey. They were everywhere in the sky and on the ground. If it was an ordinary person, they would have long been terrified. However, the male immortal did not feel anything and walked step by step towards the end of the stairs. "Sir, why have you come?" When the male immortal came close to Wang Mingyuan asked. The male immortal actually ignored him and walked past him. His fluttering white hair almost touched Wang Mingyuan's face. Wang Mingyuan stood there and watched as the male celestial walked into the divine hall and sat down on the main seat of the divine hall. That seat was originally the leader of the 8 tribes. Even Di Tian, who had been the leader of the 8, did not have the right to sit there. Now Wang Mingyuan was only sitting on the second seat. Only the king of the higher race that the 8 tribes relied on had the right to sit there. When they saw the male immortal sitting on the throne, regardless of whether it was the kings or the normal members of the 8 tribes, all of them were from big tribes. They were just about to rush into the hall to kill the male immortal, but Wang Mingyuan stretched out a hand to stop them. "Sir, what do you want?" Wang Mingyuan looked at the male immortal sitting high up on the throne and asked. "From today onwards, the 8 tribes will seal the mountain for 3 years. No one from the 8 tribes will be allowed to leave. Anyone who disobeys will be killed." The male immortal looked down at Wang Mingyuan and continued. In the past, Bodhidharma faced the wall for 9 years and finally understood some things. You do not need to face the wall. Just stand there and reflect on yourself for 9 years. No matter how stupid you are, you should be able to understand some things. What right do you have to do that? The 8 tribes were enraged. King Yiksha questioned them. Instantly, the crowd was infuriated. Some of the 8 tribes couldn't help but rush into the temple. Just as the battle was about to break out, they saw a golden beam of light tear through the sky. Supremacy! The golden light landed on the ground. It was a Buddha suffused with golden light. King Yiksha and company hurriedly went forward to bow, but before they could say anything, they were interrupted by the Buddha. The Buddha walked in front of the male immortal and pressed his palms together. He bowed slightly and said, "Sword Immortal, please don't be angry. From today onwards, the 8 tribes will seal the mountain for 3 years. The Dragon King will reflect on himself for 9 years, and is not to leave. Sir, do you have any other requests? The disciples of my sword immortal lineage cannot die in vain. Those who kill him must pay with their lives." As the man spoke, his gaze was fixed on Wang Mingyuan. He knew that Jiang Yan was Wang Mingyuan's disciple. Chapter 1395. Of course. Buddha nodded slightly and looked at Wang Mingyuan. The news of the perfect sword immortal's death on Earth had long spread to the upper echelons of the dimension. Although not many knew the exact situation, most of the upper echelons knew that the perfect sword immortal had been schemed against by Jiang Yan. Buddha didn't find it strange that the sword immortal lineage had come to settle scores with Wang Mingyuan. However, Wang Mingyuan was now considered the leader of the 8. It was acceptable for him to reflect on himself for 9 years. If he were to really kill Wang Mingyuan, not only would the 8's reputation be tarnished, but the higher race that the 8 relied on would also have a bad reputation. This matter was done by Wang Mingyuan's disciple. Wang Mingyuan, stepping forward to give the sword immortal lineage an explanation, was the best outcome. When Wang Mingyuan saw Buddha look at him, he naturally knew what he meant. "How should I address you?" Wang Mingyuan's expression was as calm as ever. It was as though what the immortal had said had nothing to do with him. "Berserk sword." The male immortal finally opened his mouth and replied casually. The moment the 2 words were spoken, the expressions of the 8 changed drastically. Few people in the dimension didn't know of Berserk sword. His infamy was just too great. He was known as the #1 calamity after the apocalypse. Furthermore, this reputation wasn't just for show. Berserk sword had once killed an apocalypse as a calamity, shocking the entire dimension. Everyone knew of him. Although Wang Mingyuan had the strength of a calamity grade and had impressive combat strength, he was still far inferior to a powerful calamity like Berserk sword. Even most of the 8 believed that the king of the 8 wasn't on the same level as Berserk sword. No one treated Berserk sword as a calamity grade. Many even treated him as an apocalypse grade expert. Previously, the 8 were extremely indignant because of Berserk sword's might, but when they heard his name, it was as though a basin of ice water had been poured over their heads. They felt a chill run down their spines. For some reason, the indignation in their hearts vanished. After Wang Mingyuan learned of Berserk sword's name, he didn't show any change in expression. All he did was nod slightly before walking towards Berserk sword. "Did I say that you could move?" The sword intent around Berserk sword surged as he slashed at Wang Mingyuan. Wang Mingyuan said as he walked, "You must still be determined to get the sword that was lost on Earth in the mythological era, right? Do you know where that sword is?" Berserk sword's sword will paused for a moment as he stared at Wang Mingyuan. "I don't know." Wang Mingyuan shook his head frankly. "If what you're going to say next doesn't satisfy me, then it won't be something that can be solved with 9 years of self-reflection," Berserk sword said coldly. However, Wang Mingyuan did not seem to hear what he said. As he walked toward Berserk sword, he said, "If we want to take back that celestial sword, we need to borrow the power of the humans on Earth. You don't have any objections to this, do you?" "Continue," Berserker said with a frown. "If they could directly descend to Earth to retrieve the immortal sword, the immortals wouldn't have to go through so much trouble to secretly nurture Jiang Yan and the League of Defender. They would have long gone to look for it themselves." Wang Mingyuan continued, "Then let me analyze it for you. Right now, the forces on Earth are divided into 5 major factions. The first faction is the Holy Temple and the 6 human families. I believe this faction will not be used by the immortals. You know the reason better than me." Wang Mingyuan had already walked into the hall, but he had no intention of stopping. He continued walking towards Berserk sword, who was sitting on the main seat. As he walked, he said, "The second faction is the League of Defender. It's currently led by Jiang Yan. According to what I know, his guardian has already advanced to the calamity grade. Furthermore, the immortals are no longer able to control it." "Continue." Berserk sword looked at Wang Mingyuan, killing intent brewing in his eyes. "The third faction is the Holy Spirit Council. President Ye is also my disciple," Wang Mingyuan said. Berserk sword was slightly taken aback. Ye was actually Wang Mingyuan's disciple. He really didn't know about this. He wasn't in charge of the matters on Earth. If his disciple, Perfect Sword Immortal, hadn't died, Berserk sword wouldn't have bothered with this matter. The fourth faction is the League government. Compared to the first 3 factions, the current League government is a little weaker. However, due to the appearance of the mythical fluid, this faction has the greatest potential. As long as there's enough time, this faction will definitely produce more and more experts in the future. It will definitely become mainstream in the future. As Wang Mingyuan spoke, he had already arrived in front of the treasure platform. He still had no intention of stopping. "Hui Haifeng is your disciple." This isn't a secret. There's no need for you to flaunt, Berserk Sword said. Wang Mingyuan smiled. The fifth faction is those local tyrants. Among them, the Yin family in Luoyang is the strongest. Their strength can already compete with the 6 families. It's true that you were born in Luoyang, but your Wang family isn't worth mentioning in Luoyang. Don't tell me you're trying to say that in Tianzhua is also your disciple? Berserk Sword said coldly. No, but the third person in Luoyang is Zhou, who has some connections with the Yin family. He's also my disciple. You should know this very well, right? Wang Mingyuan was already standing in front of Berserk Sword, within arm's reach. So what? Berserk Sword said disdainfully as he looked at Wang Mingyuan. Wang Mingyuan's disciples might be powerful figures on Earth, but in Berserk Sword's eyes, they were nothing. If it wasn't for the fact that they were born on Earth and were protected by Earth, he wouldn't even need to lift a finger to kill them. It's not a big deal. However, apart from these 5 factions, may I ask who else can help the immortals find an immortal sword? Wang Mingyuan asked Berserk Sword. Berserk Sword was slightly taken aback before his expression gradually changed. These people were really nothing in the dimension. Berserk Sword couldn't even be bothered to take a look at them. However, on Earth, the power these people possessed was unimaginable. Now that the situation on Earth had basically stabilized, there was no need to think about the Holy Temple. The Holy Temple was the Immortals' enemy to begin with. If it wasn't for the Holy Temple controlling Earth in the past, the Immortals wouldn't have been so passive. However, that immortal sword had an extraordinary meaning to the entire Immortals. They had to take it back no matter what. The Immortals had been accumulating for so long and had paid such a huge price to send so many guardians to Earth. Everything was for that immortal sword. In this era, Earth had undergone a large-scale mutation. The ruling of the 6 families had also been defeated, and the Immortals finally had an opportunity. They originally imagined that they could control the League of Defender for their own use, but to their surprise, they were schemed against by Jiang Yan. They could only blame the perfect sword immortal for being too stupid. Despite being in a good situation, they still ended up in such a state. Without the League of Defender, the Immortals could only support another human faction. However, based on the current distribution of factions, it was probably very difficult for a new faction to appear. Furthermore, the Tower of Babel was still in the hands of the League of Defender. Without the Tower of Babel's help, the Immortals couldn't send many resources to Earth. It wasn't that they lacked resources, but that they didn't have a stable passageway. Berserk Sword thought carefully and realized that the Immortals had reached a point where they couldn't use anyone. The only people they could use were Wang Mingyuan's disciples. Even if the Immortals weren't afraid of wasting time and energy to support a new faction, with Wang Mingyuan's disciples and the Holy Temple around, it was probably impossible for them to grow. Wang Mingyuan had already hinted very clearly. With his disciples around, it was a pipe dream for the Immortals to take back the immortal sword from Earth. But Wang Mingyuan's slap landed on Berserk Sword's face, causing his face to tilt to the side. Everyone was shocked, and their eyes were glued to the screen. Berserk Sword widened his eyes as he suddenly turned to stare at Wang Mingyuan. He was like a beast that was choosing a person to devour. The sword intent on his body surged crazily as though it wanted to tear the world apart, but he didn't attack Wang Mingyuan. "You're not convinced?" As Wang Mingyuan spoke, he slapped Berserk Sword in the face again. With a smack, he turned his face to the other side. "Then bear with it," Wang Mingyuan said indifferently as he looked at the enraged Berserk Sword. Chapter 1396. In the end, Berserk Sword didn't attack Wang Mingyuan and directly left the group of 8. Although the sword intent was still terrifying, it wasn't as intimidating as before. Instead, it made people feel somewhat embarrassed. The group of 8 looked at Wang Mingyuan with a strange expression. It seemed like it was the first time the Buddha had met Wang Mingyuan. He looked at him deeply and then left the group of 8 without saying a word. Although Berserk Sword didn't attack, his departure would greatly affect the group of 8 and the Buddha clan. He didn't know how to deal with it, so he could only do nothing and rush back to the Buddha clan to report. In an ancient temple, the Buddha reported this matter to an ancient Buddha. The ancient Buddha's eyebrows and hair were connected together, reaching the ground. His face was full of wrinkles like tree bark, and his body was covered in dust. He looked like a clay statue as he sat there. After listening, the ancient Buddha finally opened his eyes. His eyes weren't like an old man's eyes, but bright and deep as if millions of grains of sand were flowing within them. His entire body was deathly still, but his eyes were full of vitality like a youth. The Buddha bowed and asked, "Your Excellency, since Berserk Sword was able to endure this and didn't kill Wang Mingyuan on the spot, there should still be room for negotiation, right?" The ancient Buddha said indifferently, "It's not that he doesn't want to kill him, but he doesn't know if he can." The Buddha was startled, not knowing what the ancient Buddha meant. If Berserk Sword wanted to kill someone, he couldn't think of anyone he couldn't kill in this world. The ancient Buddha continued, "Berserk Sword is known as the #1 calamity in this world, and it's not a lie. Do you think an ordinary calamity can slap his face so easily? Even if he was distracted for a moment, how could he be slapped a second time?" The Buddha came to a realization and said in shock, "Your Excellency means that Wang Mingyuan is stronger than Berserk Sword? I don't know, and neither does Berserk Sword. In addition, Wang Mingyuan is right. There are only so many people on Earth that can be used, so Berserk Sword didn't make a move," the ancient Buddha said. The more the Buddha thought about it, the more shocked he became. Apart from the Sage Temple and the 6 great families, all the powers that can be used are basically under the control of Wang Mingyuan's disciples. Did he do it intentionally or not? If he did, then it's too terrifying. The temple has been planning for so long, but in the end, they were still unable to control the situation. Wang Mingyuan only used a few disciples. Is it possible that it was unintentional? Whether it was intentional or not, this person will play an important role in the battle for Earth in the future. He can't be underestimated, said the ancient Buddha. Now that he belongs to our clan, can we? The Buddha said while suppressing his excitement. Fortune and misfortune come together. There is no need to worry about it. Go, the ancient Buddha said and slowly closed his eyes. He returned to his clay statue-like appearance. The Buddha stared at the ancient Buddha in a daze. In the end, he had no choice but to bow and leave. Zhouwen wasn't in a good mood. He had already attempted fusion many times. As he was afraid of failure, Zhouwen used companion eggs as supplementary materials every time. Such a synthesis would only add the skills and not change Tyrant Behemoth. Furthermore, he chose species with a higher success rate to synthesize them. This ensured that Tyrant Behemoth wouldn't be damaged due to failure. However, no matter how they combined, they failed to obtain the few skills Zhouwen wanted. Every time this skill was combined, it would be combined with another skill, wiping out the previous skill. As such, it was either this skill was gone or that skill was gone. It drove Zhouwen crazy. He then tried the bloodline function, allowing Tyrant Behemoth to have a second life providence. However, he still failed many times. Thankfully, the bloodline function only consumed supplementary materials and didn't harm the main pet. Under the repeated failures, Zhouwen had the urge to fuse Heaven Azura and Tyrant Behemoth together. Heaven Azura's attack power was very strong, but compared to Tyrant Behemoth's absolute strength, it was still much weaker. However, Heaven Azura's luck was very useful. It wasn't bad if he could fuse them together. However, with so many failures, Zhouwen didn't dare take the risk. Furthermore, it wasn't of much use even if he fused them. This was because he had to grind companion eggs while fusing them. If he couldn't grind suitable companion eggs, he didn't even have a chance to fuse them. Now, Tyrant Behemoth had 5 skills, armor penetration, piercing, laceration, unstoppable, and combat God's blessing, cast by Zhou. Previously, he had ever victorious, but it had been wiped out when he was grinding unstoppable. Up to now, he hadn't been able to fuse ever victorious and unstoppable at the same time. He was either lacking one or the other. In fact, Zhou had already spent money to buy quite a number of companion eggs to fuse. He didn't know how long it would take for him to fight them alone. This is the only companion egg left with ever victorious. Zhou looked at the companion egg in his hand and hesitated if he should continue fusing it. To be honest, the 5 skills he had were already very good. They basically enhanced his attack power, but without ever victorious, Zhou felt that it was a little incomplete. However, Zhou had bought all the companion eggs he could buy. He wasn't afraid of spending money, but he couldn't buy them even if he had the money. Isn't life about perfection? I'll fuse them. Zhou gritted his teeth and placed the last companion egg with ever victorious. Amidst the light, the companion egg and tyrant behemoth fused into one, flashing with the glow of a successful fusion. Zhou felt uneasy as he looked at the fused tyrant behemoth. Immediately, he felt a chill run from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Not only did he fail to fuse ever victorious, but even unstoppable and battle God's blessing were gone. Apart from armor penetration, piercing, and laceration, he only had poison fangs. My tyrant behemoth isn't a poison-type creature. What's the use of closing poison fangs? Return me ever victorious. Zhou was too deep for tears. Now that he didn't have ever victorious companion eggs or ever victorious companion eggs, he was done for. Ah Xing, is there anyone else selling Overlord Snake companion eggs? Zhou had no choice but to ask Xing again. Young master, I've really used them. I've bought all the Overlord Snakes that can be obtained. Now, even the Overlord Snakes in Dragon Gate Grotto have been killed. The price of the Overlord Snake companion egg has doubled, but there's still no stock, and Xing answered helplessly. Zhou asked a few more companion beasts he needed, but the answers were the same. He really couldn't obtain any. What should I do? Zhou was extremely depressed. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have done it. At the very least, there was unstoppable. The augmentation of the battle god's blessing wasn't bad either. It strengthened his surroundings. Tian had been watching Zhou from the side the entire time, but she didn't let him see her. This was because she hadn't been able to help him the last time he was in danger. She was a little embarrassed to appear in front of him again. Seeing Zhou's depressed look, Tian seemed to make up her mind. End of this chapter. Chapter 1397. Although he's a baddie, Mother said that everyone is equal in front of God. He should have the right to be saved. Tian muttered to herself as though she was trying to convince herself. Zhou was extremely displeased that the fusion had failed. He put away his phone and wanted to go out for a breather, so he went to the garden. Sitting on the bench, he summoned Banana Fairy, Demonic Neonate, and the other companion beast. He got Banana Fairy to fan the flames while the evil spirit king massaged his legs. He also got the other companion beasts to come out for a breather. Demonic Neonate hugged the demonic sword and stood motionless by the side. Those who didn't know would think that she was a wax figurine. I can only put the matter of giving Tyrant Behemoth the fusion skill aside for now. I'll think about it after I get the companion egg. Since I can't do anything here, I can only head to Venus to kill the Calamity who fired the bullet. If I can kill him, I might be able to get a Calamity grade gun to drop. That would solve all the problems. Zhou's infinite loop space had basically taken shape. All he needed was the final combat test. He still needed to experiment if he could trap a Calamity grade bullet in the infinite loop space. The Venus dungeon hadn't been refreshed yet, so he could only wait until tomorrow to test it out. Zhou leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes to relax his mind so that he could escape the depression of his failure. At that moment, Tian was standing not far from him. She was sizing up the companion beasts that Zhou had summoned. She was even holding a candy in her hand. Seeing how pitiful he is, I'll give him a candy. This is to return the plum blossom cake he treated me to. I'll still take revenge for Yana. Tian muttered to herself as she sized up Zhou Wen's companion beast. The first thing Tian saw was demonic neonate. However, when she saw her, she immediately felt a sense of disgust. It was as though it was an innate hatred. Soon, Tian rejected demonic neonate before looking at Banana Fairy. Tiantian's gaze landed on Banana Fairy's chest before looking at her flatland. Then, she gave up on Banana Fairy and looked at the other companion beasts. The evil spirit king didn't like it either. The other companion beasts seemed to have their own problems. Zhou had quite a number of companion beasts. Although he hadn't summoned all of them, there were more than 10 outside. Tian scanned the area and hesitated for a moment before walking towards the soul reflection mirror that Zhou had placed beside him. Tian silently arrived in front of the soul reflection mirror. Although the soul reflection mirror was on the bench and couldn't be any closer to Zhou, he didn't notice her when she arrived in front of the mirror. Even the soul-revealing mirror couldn't reflect Tiantian's figure. It's just a mirror. It shouldn't have any destructive power, right? As long as he has some life-saving abilities, he won't have to harm others, Tian said as she peeled the wrapper off the candy in her hand and placed it on the mirror. The moment the candy touched the mirror, it immediately melted and flowed into the mirror in a strange manner. At this time, a faint shadow appeared in the mirror. The shadow swallowed the candy in one gulp. Zhou was basking in the sun comfortably when he suddenly felt the soul reflection mirror tremble unnaturally. When he opened his eyes, he realized that the soul reflection mirror had undergone a tremendous change. At that moment, the soul reflection mirror had already turned jade white like jade. The mirror's surface had also turned crystalline. It was clearly a smooth mirror, but there were many angles like the surface of a diamond. That wasn't all. The soul reflection mirror was still constantly changing. The jade layer on the surface gradually melted into juice as milky white juice dripped down. Every drop of juice reduced the jade white color of the soul reflection mirror's body, making it even more crystalline and transparent. How can this be? Zhou was alarmed as he watched the soul reflection mirror constantly evolve. This was because in such a short period of time, the soul reflection mirror that was at the mortal stage had already advanced to the epic stage. Furthermore, it was constantly evolving. However, Zhou didn't remember giving the soul reflection mirror anything good. In fact, the soul reflection mirror didn't eat anything. It could only absorb some essence energy dimensional crystals every time, but the amount it absorbed wasn't much. Zhou wanted the soul reflection mirror to evolve, but he couldn't think of a solution. To his surprise, the soul reflection mirror had evolved on its own. Could it be that the way the soul reflection mirror evolves is to bask in the sun? Zhou looked at the sun in the sky. Apart from that, he really couldn't figure out why the soul reflection mirror would evolve. Furthermore, it had evolved so rapidly. While Zhou was still thinking, the soul reflection mirror advanced again and reached the mythical stage. Zhou realized that he could see a faint figure in the mirror. It seemed to be the shadow of a woman, but he couldn't see her facial features clearly. All he could see was her figure and clothes. It felt very beautiful. Why is it still evolving? Zhou expression turned odd when he saw that the soul reflection mirror was still evolving. Now, even a fool knew that the soul reflection mirror wasn't as simple as basking in the sun to evolve. Something must have happened to make it evolve. What the hell happened? Zhou used Truth Listener to observe his surroundings. After advancing to the Terror grade, he was much more accustomed to Truth Listener's ability. He could already hear all kinds of sounds he wanted to hear. However, after listening for a while, he didn't discover anything. It was as though the soul reflection mirror could really evolve just by basking in the sun. Seeing Zhou Wen's surprised expression, Tian felt a little smug. Isn't it too early to be surprised now? What should I do in the future? The soul reflection mirror had already become crystalline like a crystal. The figure in the mirror became clearer and clearer. It looked like a woman in a white chiffon dress. Just from her appearance, she looked a little like a fairy. However, for some reason, Zhou felt that the figure seemed a little ghostly. It wasn't as elegant and otherworldly as a real fairy. Zhou wasn't just shocked because he felt that the soul reflection mirror was about to break through to the terragrade. No way. It's about to advance to the terragrade? Zhou was a little dumbfounded. He originally imagined that Enxing had secretly done it. From the looks of it, it was impossible for it to be Enxing. No matter how capable Enxing was, it was impossible for him to obtain such a good item to directly advance the mortal stage soul reflection mirror to the terragrade. If there was such a good item, it should have been given to Tianzhua first. It was impossible for it to be given to him first. Why isn't Tianzhua back yet? Zhou couldn't help but grumble inwardly when he thought of Tianzhua. He didn't plan on guarding Tianzhua's home for a long time. There were many things waiting for him to do. Luoyang was too small for him. As expected, the soul reflection mirror advanced to the terragrade. Zhou was pleasantly surprised as he looked at the glass-like soul reflection mirror that emitted a strange glow. He was delighted that the soul reflection mirror had advanced to the terragrade, reducing the trouble of feeding it. However, he was shocked that the soul reflection mirror was still advancing without any signs of stopping its evolution. No way. Don't tell me it's really advancing to the calamity grade? Zhou was alarmed and afraid. Chapter 1398. Zhou knew that when an ordinary creature advanced to the calamity grade, it would trigger a calamity. He just didn't know if such a situation would happen when a companion beast advanced to the calamity grade. Regardless, Zhou wasn't willing to take the risk. He directly stored the soul reflection mirror into the chaos space. Zhou sank his consciousness into the chaos space and continued observing the changes in the soul reflection mirror. If the soul reflection mirror can really advance to the calamity grade, what kind of abilities will it have? Can the calamity grade soul cleansing divine light directly turn a calamity grade creature into an idiot? Many thoughts flashed through Zhou mind. The soul reflection mirror became more and more transparent, but the woman's figure wasn't completely revealed. It remained blurry and indistinct, seemingly visible yet invisible. Not long after, the soul reflection mirror's body was almost transparent. Just as Zhou was worried that the soul reflection mirror would become invisible in the future, he wouldn't be able to see it. What if he accidentally shone it on his own people? Suddenly, beams of rainbow-colored light spewed out from the soul illumination mirror, instantly melting a large swath of the chaos fog in the chaos space. Zhou felt his divine sense ache as he couldn't help but be alarmed. He hurriedly retracted his divine sense. Even so, he still felt dizzy. His mind went blank for a moment, and his divine sense suffered quite a bit of damage. If he had retreated any later, his divine sense might have been completely destroyed. He would probably have become an idiot. Thankfully, I put away the soul reflection mirror. Otherwise, the range of the seven-colored beam would have definitely wiped out the family, much less all of Luoyang. Zhou felt a lingering fear just thinking about it. Although he didn't have a good impression of Tianzhua, it would be too much to wipe out the family. Furthermore, his father, Ouyanglan, and Sheng and company were here. In the future, when companion beasts advance to the calamity grade, I have to place them in the chaos space. Zhou didn't know when the soul reflection mirror would fully evolve, nor did he dare pry into the chaos space. All he could do was wait. Zhou carefully recalled the entire process of the soul reflection mirror's advancement. Before he could figure out why it had suddenly advanced to the calamity grade, he saw Ansheng walk into the garden. "Young master, someone has entered the Venus dimensional zone again," Ansheng said. "Who is it?" Zhouwen knew that the person was likely an acquaintance from Ansheng's expression. "An immortal of the League of Defender," Ansheng replied. Zhouwen didn't tell anyone that Jiang Yan was an immortal, so Ansheng didn't know that the immortal was Jiang Yan. However, even if he knew, Jiang Yan's hostile relationship with the An family wouldn't change much. This was because Zhouwen already knew that Jiang Yan was Cave Era's younger brother. As for Cave Era and Yusuji now, they came from overseas. Jiang Yan was likely from overseas as well. He was also hostile to the Federation. Jiang Yan had probably not come to Sunset College to study. It was very likely that he was a spy. Zhouwen and Ansheng went to the Rubik's Cube together to watch Jiang Yan challenge it again. By the time Zhouwen arrived at the cube, Jiang Yan had already entered the Venus dimensional zone and killed all the metal guards. The first golden battle god was about to come out. Jiang Yan didn't come personally the last time the people from the League of Defender challenged the checkpoint. This time, only Jiang Yan came. After the golden battle god appeared, he attacked Jiang Yan. Frost bullets shot at him at the speed of light. Jiang Yan was still wearing the Heaven Immortal armor. He didn't wear the Immortal Burial armor. However, just the Heaven Immortal armor was rather terrifying. When the frost bullets hit the Heaven Immortal armor, they exploded like ice fog, but they failed to damage the Heaven Immortal armor at all. As expected of a calamity-grade guardian, Zhouwen was secretly envious. Ansheng had obtained 5 golden battle god companion beasts from Zhouwen, so he naturally knew how powerful the golden battle god was. Seeing that the frost bullets couldn't injure the immortal, he immediately exclaimed, "Calamity grade? The guardian of the immortal has advanced to the calamity grade. Is there a need to be so surprised? The League of Defender has taken so many resources from the dimension. Isn't it normal for it to advance to the calamity level?" Zhouwen said guiltily. He didn't dare say that Jiang Yan had advanced to the calamity level because of him. Ansheng suddenly turned to look at Zhouwen and sized him up. "Why are you looking at me?" Zhouwen forced himself to calm down. "Young master, didn't you make a trip to the League of Defender previously? But I didn't hear you mention that the immortal is at the calamity grade," Ansheng said as he stared at Zhouwen. "This isn't something glorious for me. What's there to say?" Zhouwen said. "No, this isn't like you, young master. When you saw that the immortal was at the calamity grade, your emotions didn't change at all. You should have known long ago. It's obvious that you must have seen him in the League of Defender. To be able to return intact after seeing a calamity-grade immortal, there's a huge problem with the immortal not coming to Luoyang to cause trouble," Ansheng said slowly as he stared at Zhouwen. "What problem can there be?" Zhouwen said, pretending not to care. Ansheng seemed to see through Zhouwen's thoughts as he revealed a strange smile. "With your temper, young master, you will definitely warn us if there's really danger. However, you didn't mention anything about the immortal being at the calamity grade. It means that you don't think it's a threat. However, how can a calamity grade immortal not be a threat? I think there are only 2 possibilities. One is that your strength has already exceeded a calamity grade immortal. The immortal isn't your match, so he naturally doesn't dare to cause trouble in Luoyang. There's no need to warn him. Another possibility is that you know the immortal and know that the immortal won't attack you or Luoyang, so you didn't say anything." Zhouwen looked at Ansheng with a complicated expression as he thought to himself, "Could it be that Ansheng is a bug in my stomach?" He guessed everything. Ansheng continued, "Young master, you are more cautious. Even if you have the ability to defeat the immortal, you should have warned him. I think the latter is more likely. Young master, are you really familiar with the immortal? Is it convenient for you to tell me who he is?" Ansheng seemed to have turned his doubts into certainty as he pressed. Since you're so good at guessing, go ahead and guess for yourself, Zhou said expressionlessly. I can't guess. Young master, you are the best. You have a wide network and have friends all over the world, Xing said with his head lowered. When Zhou heard Xing's words, he knew that Xing had most likely guessed it. As Zhou social circle wasn't wide, he only knew a few people, so it wasn't difficult to guess. Zhou pretended not to hear him and continued watching Jiang Yan clear the stage. The golden battle god was blasted apart with a wave of Immortal's hand. The golden battle god that appeared next was the same. It couldn't injure the Immortal at all. All of them were blasted apart with a wave of his hand. None of this was surprising. What Zhou really wanted to know was how Jiang Yan planned on dealing with the seventh fatal strike. Do I have to reach the Golden Palace before the seventh strike? As Zhou pondered, Immortal had already walked into the opened passageway. His speed didn't look fast. Every step was like a normal person's walk, but with one step, his body had already traversed an extremely great distance. His speed was faster than the average Terragrade running at full speed. The first shot finally sounded. When everyone saw it clearly, they realized that Immortal had a bullet between his fingers. He had actually used his fingers to catch a Calamity Grade attack. Chapter 1399. Gunshots constantly sounded. 6 consecutive shots were caught by Immortal's fingers, but they didn't stop him from advancing at all. Others thought that Immortal's guardian was extremely powerful, but Zhou knew that this fellow still had Immortal burial hidden in his body. In fact, it was the power of 2 guardians. Furthermore, it was a double calamity. It was naturally not something an ordinary calamity-grade creature could compare with. However, Zhou still wanted to know how Jiang Yan was going to deal with the 7th bullet. The 7th bullet wasn't something that could be blocked with strength. Unless Jiang Yan's strength had already exceeded that of a calamity, it was naturally impossible. The other factions were also paying attention to Immortal. Many people were alarmed, especially the factions that had once been enemies with the League of Defender. They wished that Immortal would die in the Venus dimensional zone. After all, the various factions didn't have any calamity-grade combat strength. A calamity-grade like Immortal was like a nuclear bomb. Who wouldn't be afraid? In the Venus dimensional zone, Jiang Yan had already arrived in front of the Golden Palace before the Calamity shot the 7th shot. All he needed to do was step onto the steps to successfully pass. However, Jiang Yan didn't step onto the steps. Instead, he stopped in front of the steps, clearly waiting for the 7th shot to kill. Bam! The 7th shot finally sounded. Everyone widened their eyes as they stared intently at Jiang Yan, wanting to see how he would deal with the 7th bullet. When everyone saw the 7th bullet, it had already shot into Jiang Yan's palm. Even the Sky Mortal armor couldn't completely block the 7th bullet. The bullet was like a drill bit as sparks and lightning tore through the Sky Mortal armor. It continued drilling in and was about to penetrate Jiang Yan's palm. However, in the next second, Jiang Yan closed his fingers and grabbed the bullet. Sparks shot out from the gaps between his fingers, but the bullet ultimately failed to rush out. Jiang Yan held the bullet and walked up the step. He opened the door to the Golden Palace and the metal ball flew out. The scene switched back to the rankings. Everyone stared at the rankings, wanting to know Immortal's ranking. Based on Immortal's performance, his ranking definitely wouldn't be low. He had grabbed a calamity-grade bullet with his bare hands, and it was the 7th bullet that would kill. Even the Dragon Turtle's defense couldn't withstand it, but Immortal had done it. Others might not know, but Zhou knew that the Sky Mortal had failed to block the 7th bullet that would have killed him. Jiang Yan had still used Immortal Burial, so the bullet was probably resisting the power of Immortal Burial. Judging from the final scene, Zhang Xian was not able to completely suppress the bullet. 5 stars. It's 5 stars. Someone exclaimed. Xian's name appeared on the ranking list, followed by 5 shining golden stars. Furthermore, Immortal's name actually surpassed Tsukuyomi's despite both being 5 stars, becoming first on the rankings. This ranking made a lot of people very uncomfortable. After all, many factions were secretly competing with the League of Defender. From their point of view, the League of Defender was a lackey of the dimension. Xian had advanced to the Calamity level and even obtained first place on the rankings. This was a greater blow to ordinary people than Tsukuyomi obtaining first place. This was especially so for those humans who had worked hard and even risked their lives to use mythical fluid or spirit casting. At this moment, they felt as if a huge rock was pressing down on their hearts. Zhou didn't feel anything. After the previous battle, he realized that guardians weren't necessarily tools of the dimension. Just like the guardians of the cave era and Jiang Yan's guardians, although they were created in the dimension, they were born on Earth. They had their own independent thoughts, and the dimension couldn't completely control them. Thinking back to a guardian like the drought demon goddess, it wasn't that easy for the dimension to control her. Of course, although Zhou Wen's view of guardians had changed a little, it didn't mean that he wanted to contract a guardian. He had been used to being alone since he was young. Companion beasts like demonic neonate and banana fairy were already a part of his body, so he didn't feel too repulsed. However, guardians were independent individuals. Zhou Wen wasn't used to having such an existence inseparable from him. He was also afraid that his secrets would be exposed. After this battle, the reputation of the League of Defender was pushed to the peak once again. Many young people of the new generation had thoughts of contracting a guardian. Compared to the other paths of breaking through to the mythical stage, contracting a guardian was undoubtedly the easiest and the fastest increase in strength. Young master, do you plan on obtaining the Venus companion beast? Anxing suddenly asked. Zhou Wen saw that Anxing's expression was very serious when he spoke. It was rare to see him speak like this, so he asked, I've thought about it, but I don't know if I can succeed. If it's possible, take first place now, Anxing said seriously. Why now? Zhou Wen asked in puzzlement. Because humans need confidence. Humans these days lack confidence. Anxing's expression was solemn as he continued. In this era, most humans are at a loss. They don't know how to take the fork in the road. At this moment, someone needs to stand up and give them a push. However, this person might push them onto a different path. Now that an immortal has stepped forward and given many people a push, it might even affect the choice of a generation's future path. That might not be the wrong path, Zhou Wen said after some thought. He didn't believe that contracting a guardian was definitely the wrong path. Anxing nodded and said with a sigh, indeed, it might not be the wrong path, but at the very least, we have to let the next generation see that there are other paths they can take and not just that one path. The path might be a good one, but with more people taking it, it will become a single log bridge. Zhou Wen lowered his head and pondered over Anxing's words. After a while, he looked up and said in enlightenment, Then let me open up a new path. Young master, all the best. After Anxing received Zhou Wen's affirmation, his expression instantly changed. He looked like a fanboy who was cheering for Zhou Wen. Zhou Wen looked at Anxing and was somewhat at a loss whether to laugh or cry. He suddenly understood and Tianzhua. He was clearly very satisfied with Anxing's workability, but he would still give him a warning from time to time. This Anxing was someone who didn't let others have peace. Sometimes, Zhou Wen had the urge to strangle him to death. However, I can only give it a try. It's hard to say what ranking I can obtain. Furthermore, I still need some time to prepare. Zhou Wen didn't know what ranking he could obtain if he did his best. If he wanted to obtain first place, it was best to wait for the soul reflection mirror to complete its evolution. Furthermore, Zhou Wen's self-created skill still had one last step to complete. Since he was going to do it, he had to do it big. Young master, if you need anything, the Sunset Army will definitely support you fully, Anxing said seriously. If you really want to support me, help me get some companion eggs. You already have the list, Zhou said. And Xing immediately wore a bitter expression. Young master, I've already scraped the ground. There's really nothing left. Chapter 1400. When the Venus dungeon respawned, Zhou entered it again. This time, he wanted to see if he could crack the 7th bullet. Space-time bandit, sky-stealing sun-swapping, absolute space, minor heavenly cycle stellar array, and other skills were used according to the routines he had practiced many times. A mini-minor heavenly cycle stellar array formed around Zhou. This minor heavenly cycle stellar array actually used the constellation array as its core. With the augmentation of the spatial skill, it formed a miniature circular space around Zhou. In theory, any attack that entered it would be trapped in the circular space forever. It was as though they had walked into the orbit of the Mobius strip. Of course, in reality, it didn't have such a powerful effect. It only used the technique of an array formation and spatial exchange to make prey that entered fall into an alternate space. When the bullets shot by the metal guards were within 3 feet of Zhou, they immediately circled around Zhou's body instead of shooting in a straight line. A large number of bullets revolved around Zhou like a galaxy. Zhou had already tested it before. Ordinary mythical bullets were indeed unable to break through the restrictions of the circular space, but Zhou wasn't sure if they could block Calamity-grade bullet. After killing all the metal guards, the Golden Battle God appeared. The Terra-grade bullets failed to break through Zhou's protective array formation. The bullets could only revolve around his body. After killing the Golden Battle God, he obtained 2 stat crystals. One was 89 strength and the other was 91 essence energy. It raised both of Zhou's stats, but he was still a distance away from the limit of 99. As the ear-piercing alarm sounded, Zhou felt somewhat uneasy. He didn't know if he could block a Calamity-grade bullet. Bam! A bullet shot out from the tunnel. With Zhou's current strength, he could already see the bullet's trajectory when he activated the disqualified. However, he didn't block it and allowed the bullet to shoot at his body. When the bullet was 3 feet away from his body, it distorted slightly, but it continued forward. This made Zhou's heart sink. Thankfully, the bullet's trajectory finally changed after advancing less than a foot. It circled around Zhou like a satellite. There's hope. Zhou was overjoyed. Bang! Bullets shot over one after another. No matter where they hit, they would eventually turn into satellites that revolved around Zhou. Only when all their strength was expended would they fall. But very quickly, Zhou discovered a problem. The Calamity-grade bullets came one after another. Before the force of the bullets in front was completely dissipated, the bullets from behind shot in again. As the number of bullets increased, problems appeared in the circulation space. The distance at which the bullets shot in increased, and they were getting closer and closer to Zhou's body. Bang! When the 5th bullet shot in, the minor heavenly cycle stellar array around Zhou disintegrated. Due to the impact of the alternating space, there was a gap. Without an accurate exchange, the balance was broken, and the entire system instantly collapsed. Before the 6th shot was fired, Zhou quit the game. There was still a problem with his ability. If he didn't solve it, there would be no benefit in continuing to fight. Only 5 bullets were enough to cause problems in the alternate space. I didn't even see the 7th bullet. This skill seems to be very problematic. Zhou's goal had always been to kill the Calamity creatures on Venus, not just to clear the level. Zhou changed dungeons and constantly used skill combinations in-game, hoping to figure out where the problem lay. After studying it for a long time, Zhou finally figured out the problem. This was because Zhou's alternate space was a combination skill formed by several skills. Once there was a deviation in the skill combination, its stability would be affected. It was very easy for the skill combination to break or even collapse. After trying a few times, he wanted to perfect and optimize the skill combination, but the outcome wasn't ideal. Once it suffered a strong impact, the skill combination would more or less fluctuate. This was something that couldn't be completely avoided. The seventh bullet has a continuous attack characteristic, but my skill combination can't withstand too much pressure. In other words, it's impossible for me to block the seventh bullet. Zhou was somewhat vexed. Now that he knew that this combination could form an alternate space, it couldn't withstand the calamity-grade bullet. All Zhou could do was continue thinking of a solution. Since the gap between the skill combinations can't be avoided, I'll fuse them into one skill. After some thought, Zhou realized that this was the only way. What's little one doing? Why haven't I seen him recently? Ouyang called Xing over and asked. Young Master Wen seems to be studying something recently. He hasn't left his room for days, and Xing answered. Ouyang looked at the empty dining table and sighed. I clearly have a husband, 2 sons, and a daughter, but there's no one to eat with me. What's going on? Madam, Uncle Zhou went out again? And Xing asked. That's right. The Dugu family discovered a historical site in a dimensional zone. They don't recognize some words, so they invited him to take a look, Ouyang said. Didn't you discuss it with young Master One before going? And Xing whispered. It's not like you don't know his temper. He usually does whatever I say, but once there are those strange ancient texts, he won't listen to anything I say. I can't do anything about him, Ouyang said helplessly. Although the Dugu family has a good relationship with us, Uncle Zhou's identity is special. If he's used by someone, it will be very disadvantageous to young Master One. It's best to be careful. If you really don't want to trouble young Master One, I can get someone to accompany Uncle Zhou, and Xing said. Ouyang said with a bitter smile, it's useless. I've sent people to protect him, but if the Dugu family really wants to touch him, how can ordinary people stop them? Unless he doesn't go out, this isn't something that can be done just by sending people to protect him. Fortunately, up until now they had not encountered any major incident. After all, he's only a scholar. His cultivation is very ordinary, so ordinary people won't make things difficult for him. And Xing also knew that this matter wasn't easy. After some thought, he didn't seem to have a good solution. If he didn't let Zhou Lingfeng out, what was the difference between letting him go to jail? However, he couldn't let Zhou follow him 24 hours a day, right? Ordinary guards would not be of much use if they encountered a strong enemy. Go and see how little one is doing. If he's free, get him to have a meal with me and chat. Don't stay cooped up in the house all day. He'll be depressed later, Ouyang said. I'll go now. And Xing agreed and turned to leave the hall, heading for Zhou Wen's courtyard. Chapter 1401. When Xing arrived at Zhou Wen's yard, he realized that Jade Rabbit and Banana Fairy were in the yard, but he didn't see Zhou Wen. Is young master around? And Xing knocked on the door and attracted Banana Fairy's attention before saying. Banana Fairy nodded before shaking her head. This action was very confusing, but Xing understood what she meant. Zhou Wen was here, but he couldn't see him. What's young master doing? He hasn't come out for days. And Xing was somewhat curious, but it wasn't convenient for him to disturb him. All he could do was leave. Just as he walked for a short distance, he suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the yard. He couldn't help but stop, turn around, and jump up. He landed on the wall and looked into the yard. After seeing the situation inside, Xing was alarmed. He saw that Zhou Wen's house was spinning crazily like a huge top. Young master, are you all right? And Xing immediately jumped into the yard and shouted at the house. No one answered him. The house was still spinning rapidly, and it was spinning faster and faster. And Xing gritted his teeth as his body shimmered with a strange glow. He held a golden battle god spear in each hand and took the opportunity to rush in. And Xing's grasp of timing was truly impressive. Under the rapid spinning, he grabbed the moment the door flashed by and slammed it open, entering the spinning house. What's going on? And Xing landed in the house and realized that everything inside was still. It was completely different from what it looked like outside. However, what was strange was that the originally square room had turned into a curved shape. Furthermore, standing in the room, he could only see less than half of the room. Then, it was as though he was isolated by some mysterious force. He couldn't see anything. He clearly felt that there should be something there, but he couldn't see it. Young master. And Xing called out a few more times, but he still didn't receive a response. He walked to the side of the curved room, hoping to find something. The room wasn't big, but after walking for a while, and Xing realized that he seemed to be spinning in circles. He paced around and was still near the door. Space elemental powers? And Xing immediately rushed to the door, hoping to rush out. However, when he rushed out of the room, he realized that he was not in the courtyard. In front of him was still the room from before. And Xing's expression immediately changed. He turned his head and indeed, the door was behind him. He gritted his teeth and rushed out the door again, only to see the same room. And Xing tried several times, but the outcome was the same. No matter which direction he charged out from, even if he smashed through the wall, he was still in the room. The entire room was like a sealed space cage, trapping him in it forever. Boom. And Xing's expression kept changing. Just as he was thinking of a way to escape, he heard a rumble. Then, the curved room returned to normal. The space that couldn't be seen previously could now be seen. Zhouwen was sitting in front of his desk, gaming on his phone. Young master, what happened? And Xing was pleasantly surprised as he hurriedly went forward and asked. What happened? I've been gaming and didn't notice anything, Zhouwen said as he put away his phone. This room just now. And Xing didn't know how to describe it. Oh, maybe I was too engrossed in gaming and was a little agitated. I accidentally exerted force on my body and caused some damage to the room. Don't worry, it's not an enemy invasion, Zhouwen said. And Xing looked at Zhouwen with an odd expression, momentarily at a loss for words. Ah Xing, why are you looking for me? Zhouwen asked. Madam said that if you have the time, you should accompany her for a meal. The overseer isn't home, and Miss Jing has been working hard on her cultivation. Uncle Zhou has also gone out, leaving Madam alone at home. She can't help but feel worried. Young master, if you have the time, spend more time with her, and Xing said. Then let's go, Zhouwen said as he stood up. He was in a good mood because he had finally successfully created a new skill. It wasn't just a combination of skills. Although he hadn't tested it, Zhouwen was certain that his skill could trap the calamity-grade bullet. As he walked, Zhouwen glanced at his phone stats. In the skill column, a new skill had indeed appeared. Small Heavenly Cycle Annihilation Array. Calamity Grade, Rank 10. Calamity Grade? Zhouwen wasn't surprised. He had experimented with it countless times in-game, so he knew that the effects of this skill had indeed exceeded the Terror grade. The only flaw of the Small Heavenly Cycle Annihilation Array was that it required a certain amount of time to accumulate strength. Although this time wasn't considered long, it was very difficult to use it in real combat. It had to be released in advance. However, to Zhouwen this was enough. Releasing the Small Heavenly Cycle Annihilation Array in advance was enough for him to challenge the Venus dungeon. This was a powerful weapon for clearing dungeons. In the face of sudden situations, he wouldn't be able to react in time. When the Venus dungeon respawned, Zhouwen experimented again. If he succeeded, he could directly challenge the Rubik's Cube ranking in reality. After accompanying Ouyang Lan for a meal, she grumbled to Zhouwen about Tianzhua and company. Zhouwen knew that she was worried. In this era, even an expert like Tianzhua couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't perish. Zhouwen wasn't good at comforting others, so he could only listen by the side. After the meal, he returned to his room. Zhouwen attempted to sink his divine sense into the chaos bead to see if the soul reflection mirror had completed its evolution. This time, Zhou was prepared. He kept his divine sense far away from the soul reflection mirror. The space in the chaos bead was very large and almost infinite. It was impossible for the seven-colored light emitted by the soul reflection mirror to illuminate every area. Indeed, Zhou divine sense wasn't injured by the soul reflection mirror. However, he could see from afar that an area was enveloped by the seven-colored light. He couldn't see anything in that area. From the looks of it, the evolution hasn't been completed. Zhou checked the items in the chaos space. Thankfully, Zhou had deliberately placed the soul reflection mirror in a relatively distant space, so it didn't cause any damage to the other items in the chaos bead. Zhou roughly looked through it, but when he saw Explosive Fiend Man, he was taken aback. Explosive Fiend Man had previously been interested in the metal, so Zhou had placed him in the chaos space with the metal. At that moment, Explosive Fiend Man looked like a metal robot. It was completely wrapped in a metal shell, only carrying two transparent crystal jars on its back. One could see a strange purple liquid inside the jars. The purple liquid bubbled like boiling water, giving off the feeling that it would explode at any moment. Chapter 1402. When did this guy evolve? Zhou didn't see the metal parts. When he sensed Explosive Fiend Man's aura, he realized that he had already reached the Terra grade. He summoned Explosive Fiend Man back and used his phone to look at his information. Explosive Fiend Man, Terra grade, evolvable, life providence, lawless life soul, destroyer wheel of destiny, destruction terror form, space-time fiend man strength, 82 speed, 82 constitution, 82 essence energy, 82 talent skill. Death list, time blast companion form, self-destruct device. Zhou carefully studied his stat. The power of the Wheel of Destiny had a strong augmentation to explosive power, greatly increasing its destructive power. As for the Space-Time Fiend Man's Terror Transformation ability, it probably had a lot to do with the metal parts. After carefully studying the Space-Time Fiend Man's description, Zhou was pleasantly surprised to discover that this was Explosive Fiend Man's most terrifying ability. Space-Time Fiend Man actually had an ability similar to Resurrection, but it wasn't a true resurrection. Perhaps it was more accurate to call it replication, but it wasn't completely accurate. To put it simply, after Explosive Fiend Man used the self-destruct device, he could still resurrect. Or rather, Explosive Fiend Man from another spacetime would come to this spacetime and replace the previous Explosive Fiend Man. Unfortunately, only one Explosive Fiend Man could exist in the same spacetime. Therefore, this was equivalent to a resurrection skill. With such a terror transformation ability, Explosive Fiend Man is equivalent to a boss that can self-destruct infinitely. If I don't like anyone, I can just charge forward and self-destruct. Zhou knew how terrifying Explosive Fiend Man's self-destruction was. It was a one-time eruption of all the energy in his body. It was very difficult for creatures of the same level to withstand such a self-destruction. Zhou entered the game excitedly, wanting to see how strong Explosive Fiend Man was. Before the Venus dungeon opened, Zhou took Explosive Fiend Man to Yang City, planning on using the blood spirits as a test subject. When the blood spirit appeared, Explosive Fiend Man charged forward under Zhou's orders. Zhou realized that his actions seemed to have some effect of shrinking space or accelerating time. He became very fast. When Explosive Fiend Man rushed past a sanguine spirit, he pressed his hand on the sanguine spirit and installed a time bomb on it. After he pulled away, the time bomb exploded and blew the sanguine spirit into pieces. This fellow was simply a punctual bomb installer. Anything that was touched by his hands would turn into a bomb and detonate its own energy. Zhou also noticed that when Explosive Fiend Man's fingers touched something, there would be purple liquid staining it. It was likely the liquid in the bottle behind him. It was the liquid that turned the things he touched into bombs. This guy is quite strong. Zhou was delighted. Unless their speed was faster than the explosive fiend man and he couldn't touch them, or their defense was strong enough to make the purple liquid useless, anyone he touched would die. Let's try the self-destruct device. Zhou made explosive fiend man charge at a blood spirit. As explosive fiend man hugged a blood spirit, his body turned into a self-destruct device and enveloped the blood spirit's body. In the next second there was a loud explosion. A purple sun rose up in Yang City, engulfing a large area. Wherever the power of the explosion passed, everything was destroyed and turned into ashes. Damn, so fierce. The power of this self-destruction is almost close to the calamity grade. Zhou was already overjoyed as he couldn't close his mouth. However, Zhou was somewhat depressed. Although the space-time fiend man had played a role, explosive fiend man couldn't be revived immediately. He had to wait for 24 hours. Forget it. 24 hours is good as long as I can revive. Otherwise, the self-destruct device will be a useless skill. I don't dare use it in real life. I finally don't have so many qualms now. Zhou was very satisfied. When it was time for the Venus dungeon to respawn, Zhou entered the dungeon again and activated the minor heavenly cycle formation. When the calamity grade bullets arrived in front of Zhou, they immediately circled around his body. The first 6 bullets didn't affect Zhou at all. Instead, their energy was absorbed by Zhou and they quickly fell to the ground. The 7th bullet also failed to pass through the minor heavenly cycle formation. It kept spinning in the formation, and its power was absorbed by the minor heavenly cycle formation and transmitted to Zhou. Due to the rapid loss of energy, after a period of time, the almost never-ending 7th bullet finally fell to the ground. I've finally succeeded. Zhou quickly teleported in the tunnel, hoping to find the calamity grade. Now that the bullets couldn't injure him, as long as he could find the calamity grade, there was a high chance of killing him. According to Zhou's guess, the calamity grade's body definitely wasn't strong. Perhaps he didn't need a powerful weapon to kill him. However, Zhou constantly teleported in the tunnel, but he failed to find any traces of the calamity grade. Every time he rushed towards the spot where the bullets came from, he didn't even find a shadow. Zhou didn't know how many calamity grade bullets he had suffered, but he still failed to find the calamity creature. He thought of all sorts of methods and used Truth Listener's ability to its limits, but he still couldn't find his location. This calamity grade's body definitely isn't strong. As long as I can find him, killing him shouldn't be difficult. Zhou was increasingly certain that his previous guess was correct. Unfortunately, he couldn't find him. Even if he knew that he could kill him, it was useless. Although I can't find anyone, the minor heavenly cycle killing array should be enough to clear the levels. I wonder what my ranking will be. Zhou wasn't sure what his ranking would be if he cleared the levels in such a manner. From a practical point of view, his method of clearing the levels was actually the same as using the heavenly robes to clear the levels. It was to prevent the bullets from hitting him. Therefore, in theory, if he couldn't kill the calamity creature, it was very likely that he would only obtain 3 stars like before. No, I have to think of a way to kill him no matter what. If I don't get first place, what's the point of getting on the rankings? After some thought, Zhou felt that it was meaningless to get 3 stars. If he wanted to get it, he would get first place. Young master, someone wants to buy the heavenly robes at a high price. Unfortunately, he isn't from the League of Defender. And Xing called. Is the price offered very high? Zhou had previously told Xing that he wanted to sell the heavenly robes to the League of Defender. For Xing to call under such circumstances meant that the price offered was probably very extraordinary. Very high. And Xing emphasized his words. Who wants to buy it? What's the price? Zhou asked again. The Cape family. The starting price is enough for us to use the accelerator. We can discuss the exact price when we meet, Xing said. All right, let's meet and talk. Zhou was originally determined to sell it to the League of Defender, but now, he didn't have such a strong need. It was the same selling it to anyone. As for the Cape family, they had always been at odds with Zhou. Zhou didn't mind letting them bleed a little. Chapter 1403. The Cape family also knew that their grudge with Zhou ran deep, so they planned on buying the heavenly robes at a high price. Zhou came to the meeting room and met the person from the Cape family who had come to negotiate. That person's name was Wood. He wasn't a direct descendant of the Cape family. According to Enxing, Wood's ancestor was the Cape family's steward. Later on, he slowly became a member of the Cape family. Mr. Zhou, you're really young and promising. I've long wanted to meet you. Today, my wish has finally been fulfilled. When Wood saw Zhou and Enxing stand up, he immediately stood up and walked over to shake Zhou's hand. Mr. Wood, you're too polite. Let's get down to business. Zhou shook Wood's hand before walking to the main seat and sitting down. Enxing and another officer sat on either side of Zhou. All right, I'll be direct. Mr. Zhou, can you name a price for your heavenly robes? It's also good for us to know if we have the capital to buy the heavenly robes. If we do, we can have a good discussion. If we don't have the capital, there's no need for us to waste time. Don't you think so? Wood said. 1,000 tons of essence crystals. That's my bottom line. Not a gram less. Before Zhou came, he had already discussed it with Enxing. He originally imagined that Wood and the other representatives would bargain. After all, 1,000 tons of essence crystals was too much. Even Zhou felt that it was impossible to sell it at that price. However, to his surprise, Wood didn't bargain. He agreed immediately. Sure, we're willing to use 1,000 tons of essence crystals to exchange for the heavenly robes. That's good. When will the deal be made? Zhou and Enxing exchanged looks, feeling that this matter definitely wasn't that simple. Indeed, Wood said, but that's how it is. Mr. Zhou, adjutant, and you should know that 1,000 tons of essence crystals is just too huge. Ignoring our Cape family, even if the 6 families join forces, it's still unknown if we can gather so many essence crystals. Then what did you mean by sure? Are you messing with me? Zhou deliberately said with a sullen expression. How would I dare to mess with you, Mr. Zhou? We do have 1,000 tons of essence crystals. We are also willing to use 1,000 tons of essence crystals to buy the heavenly robes. However, you need to dig them yourself, Wood said. What do you mean? Zhou frowned. It's like this. We really can't take out 1,000 tons of origin crystals, but we do have a good origin crystal mine. Moreover, the origin crystal reserves will definitely not be less than 1,000 tons. It might even be 2,000 or 3,000 tons. Wood's voice was very provocative. You mean to say that you want to trade the primordial crystal mine for my heavenly robe? Do you think we have the ability to dig for primordial crystal ores in the West District? Zhou frowned. Mr. Zhou, don't worry. The primordial crystal mine I mentioned isn't in the West District. It's in the East District. However, apart from our Cape family, no one knows the location of the primordial crystal mine. However, we've already explored the area, and there are definitely more than 1,000 tons of yuan crystal deposits there. If you don't believe me, you can bring professionals to explore the primordial crystal mine during the transaction. After confirming the reserves of the primordial crystal mine, you can give it to us, Wood said. Mr. Wood, that's not what we said previously. We've always been talking about spot transactions, Enxing said. Of course, if we have 1,000 tons of primordial crystals, we will definitely want to buy the heavenly robe. But in fact, the primordial crystals we can produce now are only about 800 tons. We really can't afford such a huge amount. If possible, we can use money or companion beasts to repay the debt, Wood said sincerely. How about this? We didn't know about your suggestion before. We need to have another meeting to study it. How about we continue discussing it tomorrow? And Xing said, Of course. We sincerely hope that we can complete this transaction. Wood and Company left the meeting room. The Cape family sure is scheming. They want to use the primordial crystal mine in the East District to exchange for the heavenly robe. This is equivalent to them making a deal without any capital. They definitely can't mine the mine on a large scale. Over time, it will definitely be discovered by others. Sooner or later, it won't belong to them, and Xing said with a cold snort after they left. Do you mean we shouldn't trade? Zhou said to Xing. No, if you agree, young Master One, it's best we continue the transaction. Although the mine is in our East District, we don't know where it is. We can't guarantee that our people will discover it first in the future. Therefore, if we can exchange it, we have to get it back. However, before that, we have to ensure that the mine can be mined safely and that it can be transported back safely. And Xing gave a straightforward answer. Zhou understood what Xing meant. Most of the primordial crystal mines were in dimensional zones. If the dimensional zone was too dangerous, humans wouldn't be able to stay there for long. No matter how many primordial crystals they had, it would be useless. Also, if the primordial crystal mine was too far from Luoyang and in an area that Luoyang couldn't take care of, it would be easy for others to snatch it away even if it was mined. In that case, I'll leave the negotiation to you. Zhou didn't wish to waste time on such matters. He still had many things to do. Now that he had advanced to the Terra grade, he needed a plan to advance to the Calamity grade. His stats definitely had to be raised first. However, if he only raised his stats, even if he reached the limits of the Terra grade, he definitely wouldn't be able to advance to the Calamity grade. Zhou had previously seen a few advancements to the Calamity grade. Tsukuyumi had relied on the power of a dimensional zone to advance to the Calamity grade. When she advanced to the Calamity grade, the dimensional zone almost collapsed due to excessive expenditure. Also, Jiang Yan's Heaven Immortal and Burial Immortal had advanced to the Calamity grade with the help of the power of a perfect Sword Immortal. When it came to Zhou Wen's Soul Reflection Mirror, he could clearly sense that a powerful energy had been injected into it, allowing it to advance to the Calamity level. Zhou concluded that advancing to the Calamity grade required a massive amount of energy. Furthermore, this energy wasn't ordinary essence energy. No matter how much essence energy one had, it was impossible for them to advance to the Calamity grade. Now, Zhou hoped that a Calamity grade would appear in a dimensional zone. When the time came, he could observe how dimensional creatures used the power of dimensional zones to advance to the Calamity grade. Zhou vaguely felt that he might be able to learn from their methods and use the power of dimensional zones to advance to the Calamity grade. Dimensional zone. Calamity domain. No matter how I think about it, there's a connection between the two. Perhaps dimensional zones are the key to my advancement to the Calamity grade. Zhou thought to himself, but as he hadn't heard of any calamities recently, he didn't have the chance to observe them even if he wanted to. In the next few days, Xing kept negotiating with Wood and Company, but Wood and Company weren't willing to give in on some key issues. The negotiations didn't make any progress. Finally, Wood raised a condition. He wanted Zhou to barge into the Venus dimensional zone again without using any other companion beast. He could only use the heavenly robe. If Zhou could clear it, they were willing to give in. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.